Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, October 29th, 2025. Scott Ritter will be with us in just a moment on just how cooked is Ukraine. But first, this. History tells us every market eventually falls. Currencies collapse. And look at where we are now. 37 trillion in national debt. Stocks at record highs defying gravity. So what happens next? Groceries, gas, housing, everything's going up. And this dollar, it buys less every day. When the system breaks, your stocks won't save you and your dollars won't either. But one thing will: gold. I've said it on my show for years. Gold survives collapse. Central bankers know this and billionaires know it. That's why they're buying more. Is it too late to buy, or is it just the right time? Call my friends at Lear Capital to find out. Ask questions. Get the free information. There's no pressure. And that's why I buy my gold and silver from Lear. And right now, you can get up to $20,000 in bonus metals with a qualified purchase. Call 800-511-4620 or go to LearJudgeNap.com today. Scott Ritter, welcome here, my dear friend. I want to spend a fair amount of time talking to you about Ukraine, particularly General Abdi Alodinov, to whose dinner you invited me, but I was unable to attend. But before we do, what is your understanding of the current state of affairs in Gaza? Has the IDF unlawfully re-entered as occupiers? According to Hamas figures, they killed over 100 people last night.
Again, just going off of the news reports, Israel used an incident that allegedly took place in Rafah, a place where Hamas says they have no presence. Somebody allegedly fired upon an Israeli soldier, and they use this as an excuse to unleash, an aerial assault on civilian targets in Gaza, killing, again, according to reports, 100 children. And now Israel says that it has stopped and it will once again, recognize the ceasefire. But I think this is a deliberate ploy on the part of Israel to send a signal that they are the permanent occupiers, that even under ceasefire conditions, Israel retains the right to strike anytime, any place, against anyone, without any fear of consequence.
According to the Prime Minister's office, President Trump was informed of Prime Minister Netanyahu's instructions to respond with great force. I think that's the language that was used when translated into English. And he approved it. Could you imagine Netanyahu asking Trump for permission when he wants to start killing Palestinians again?
Well, I don't imagine that Netanyahu asked for permission. I think Netanyahu informed Donald Trump based upon pre-existing agreements that were in place, that if Hamas, violated, in accordance with Israeli definitions of violation, any aspect of this agreement, that Israel retained the right to strike. And so I think that Netanyahu simply told Trump, the Hamas did this and we will be striking. He doesn't want Trump to be taken by surprise while on an overseas trip, because Trump has an ability when taken by surprise to say things off the cuff. And I think Israel is very concerned about narrative control here. But the idea that Netanyahu asked Trump for permission, I don't buy into that.
Has Hamas rearmed during this, I hate to call it a ceasefire, it's not a ceasefire, this interregnum?
I don't believe they've rearmed. I believe they've continued to retain their weapons. They haven't disarmed. To rearm would require, outside suppliers, using existing, supply lines. I don't think Hamas would risk the ceasefire carrying out the kind of precipitous action. I think Hamas has more than enough weaponry to defend itself and to carry out operations if called upon to do so. But I do believe that Hamas is serious about this ceasefire agreement and would like to see it go forward. So I don't think that they're actively seeking to acquire weaponry from outside sources, because that just creates the opportunity to give the Israelis on a silver platter what they want: an excuse to bomb.
Is Hamas alive and well? Can they defend adequately and substantially against an IDF incursion if the Israelis come up with a pretext for executing one?
The answer is yes. We know this because Israel launched their vaunted, final assault into Gaza that quickly got mired down. That's why we have a ceasefire agreement today, because Israel tried to defeat Hamas and couldn't. Hamas continued to resist and was slaughtering Israeli soldiers on a daily basis. And so, should Israel choose to, re-engage Hamas, I believe Hamas has the ability to continue to resist as effectively as they have in the past.
Is the Witkoff, Kushner, Trump, Gaza plan just a scam to get the Israeli hostages home from the right-wing Israeli perspective?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Ben-Gvir has said so. Surely has said so. That we got our hostages home. They said, now it's the time to go in and finish the job. So clearly, from the perspective of the right-wing political element in Israel that support Benjamin Netanyahu, that there was no intention of a real ceasefire. They have no intention of allowing the conditions to come into being that could lead to a Palestinian state. They want to terminate Hamas forever, but they had a huge political nightmare, which was the hostages. This was causing huge political unrest in Israel. So they believe that they have solved this problem, and now they would like to go in and finish what they started, which is the absolute elimination of Hamas. So it was always a sham. And for the Trump, Kushner, Witkoff triumvirate to pretend otherwise is absurd. Now, the question is, if you know that they believe it's a scam, what are you, the United States, these three, willing to do to ensure that it isn't a scam? Because if you don't have a plan in place to respond to the Ben-Gvirs of Israel, then you're part of the scam.
When Trump says that he's not going to allow the Israelis to annex the West Bank, is he playing word games, since they have effectively, de facto, annexed it already?
Of course he's playing word games. I mean, how else do you explain the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, arriving in Israel only to have the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, vote in favor of the annexation? I mean, they're not even disguising it. They basically waited until the number 2 man in America showed up in Israel and said, hey, we're voting in favor of annexation. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu came out and said, I can't control the parliament. It's like your Congress. No, he can. And this vote took place, and it was a signal from the Israelis to the United States that we're going to do whatever we want to do, regardless of what you think.
Switching gears, what is your understanding, Scott, of the Russian view? I'll make it more precise. The Kremlin's view of the U.S. cancellation of the planned Putin-Trump meeting in Budapest.
Look, this was a meeting that came at the request of the Trump administration. The Russians were more than happy to participate in this meeting. The United States backed away when it became clear that the Russians had no intention of caving into the United States demands. The Russian position regarding Ukraine, ceasefire, termination of conflict are quite clear and haven't changed, unlike the American position, which flops around every day. But now what's happened is because the Trump administration, tried to blame the Russians on this, the Russians have come back with some very stark language. In short, there will be no meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump until the United States comes up with a workable plan. They flipped the script. Always it was the Trump administration, we need Russia to come up with a workable plan. The Russians say, we have the plan. It's being implemented as we speak. It's playing out in ground truth on the ground in Ukraine. That's our plan. If you don't want that plan, you come up with something, but it has to be reasonable. Until you do so, we're just not interested in meeting.
Is the culprit here Marco Rubio, who, of course, comes from his whole career has been Russia bashing, put aside his Zionist views, Russia bashing from the sort of Victoria Nuland, Hillary Clinton school of Russia and Ukraine. And I know just from watching his face in his hands that Sergei Lavrov was not happy after their last telephone call. We don't know exactly what they said, but is Rubio the culprit here? Is he a trustworthy ally, agent of Donald Trump to bring about peace? Or do you think he, like his neocon buddies, does not want peace, wants the war to go on because of their crazy idea that this will drain Russia and weaken Putin?
Well, first of all, we need to be clear that Marco Rubio hates and despises Donald Trump. It's 100% certain. You only have to go back to the campaigns of 2016 to understand just how much Marco Rubio despises Donald Trump, the disdain he holds towards Donald Trump. But Marco Rubio is the byproduct of Donald Trump selling his soul to Miriam Adelson and the Israeli lobby. $100 million bought Marco Rubio the Secretary of State position. Donald Trump doesn't like him, doesn't want him, but he put him in there. Now, if this was Donald Trump,
originally want him to be vice president, and Trump said I couldn't stand working with him on a daily basis?
100%. She originally wanted him to be the vice president, and Trump drew the line there, so Rubio got the next best slot.
$100 million for the vice presidency, or second place, the Secretary of State.
There was a governor of Illinois that went to jail for selling the Senate seat. Donald Trump sold the Secretary of State seat for $100 million.
Correct. Rod Blagojevich, whom Trump pardoned.
And so, but if this was Trump's first rodeo, you could say that he didn't understand Washington, D.C. politics, that he thought that Marco Rubio, once given the Secretary of State position, would subordinate his personal whims and desires to the needs of the nation as dictated by the man who was elected president by the American people. But this is his second go-round. You see, he used to have a Secretary of State named Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo stabbed him in the back repeatedly, and Trump has acknowledged this. He said Pompeo was a bad man. John Bolton was a bad man. Well, now John Bolton was the National Security Advisor. Now we have the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor rolled up into one person, Marco Rubio, who's a bad man. Yes, we can blame Marco Rubio. He doesn't want peace with Russia, not at all. And he's sabotaging this right and left. He's giving a platform for people like Keith Kellogg. He's advocating on behalf of Scott Bessent. He's doing everything he can to push the anti-Russian policy agenda of the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party. But the blame rests with the commander-in-chief. Okay, you're the one who agreed to this compromise to put Marco Rubio in. You're the one who allowed him to double happen as National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State. You're the one who said you wanted peace with Russia, and you're the one who is silent while Marco Rubio sabotages you. So what we're seeing here is that Donald Trump is actually one of the weakest presidents that's ever served in that office. Whenever there is significant pushback from members of the establishment, Donald Trump folds like a house of cards every single time.
Is Marco Rubio wedded to the D.C. war lobby? He must.
Well, we're going to go to war with Venezuela in the very near future.
And that's a Marco Rubio war.
100% Marco Rubio war, driven by Marco Rubio. He's been praying for this war, this opportunity since 2016. And he's going to put us in a war that's going to be worse than Vietnam. It's going to be a national nightmare. It's going to be everything that we don't need right now. And the irony is we're sitting here, taking this highfalutin stance against Russia for their illegal invasion of Ukraine, total disregard for the historical fact, while we're preparing in the name of the Monroe Doctrine to invade and occupy and remove a government in Venezuela and probably in Colombia as well.
I just want to jump off of Ukraine. We'll get back to it and onto Venezuela for a moment. Are there 10,000 of your fellow Marines aboard ship off the coast of Venezuela as we speak? 10,000?
It appears to be. Yeah, that's what we do for a living. We float on ships off the coast of countries that our nation is preparing to invade. And
10,000 troops must mean a ground invasion supported by air or supported by Navy, but ground. What else could they be doing?
Well, there's a number of missions that embarked Marines can carry out. One is, of course, just a presence to hold the Venezuelans in place, to put fear in the hearts of the Venezuelans, force the Venezuelans to take certain actions. Marines can carry out raids where we go in with a carefully crafted, package to go in and accomplish a mission, whether it is to, for instance, capture Maduro, seize, critical infrastructure, to destroy things, go in, do your job, come out. 10,000 can get you a small foothold, but not much more than that. You're not going to occupy a country the size of Venezuela with a force of 10,000 Marines, no matter how good the Marines are. But with 10,000 Marines, you do have the ability to go in and do limited scope and scale military actions. Like I said, the biggest thing they do is just to have this force and readiness that forces the Venezuelans to make sure they have forces available to respond to any potential incursion by the Marines.
Do you see a line of moral relativism between Netanyahu and Trump? Trump killing innocents aboard the ships in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. Trump willing to invade without even consulting Congress, much less getting a declaration of war. Netanyahu wantonly killing and looking for excuses to do it, even if the victims are children and babies.
Well, first of all, the genocide that Netanyahu's carrying out in Gaza couldn't have been done without the support of Donald Trump in the United States. So Donald Trump is as guilty for the deaths of the Gazans in Palestine or in Gaza as Netanyahu is. Benjamin Netanyahu is not an American leader. So that, I condemn him wholeheartedly and I despise him. But, he didn't take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Donald Trump did. And Donald Trump is operating in wanton violation of the Constitution. He's committing murder, acts of war crimes every time he goes forth. We do not have a state of war between the United States and Venezuela. Therefore, every one of these ships has to be treated as a non-combatant and cannot be fired upon unless they direct potentially lethal action against an approaching American vessel. We must close with and ascertain if any laws have been broken. And if laws have been broken, then we detain and bring to justice. What we're doing is murdering people, straight up murdering. And we have a president bragging about it. And we have Lindsey Graham, behaving, this corpulent, fat-faced fool up there behaving as if he's, Herman Goring in 1943, stuffing his face, giggling about what he's going to do to Venezuela. I want to remind Lindsey Graham that Herman Goring was eventually arrested and brought to justice, and he chomped down on a cyanide tablet to avoid being found guilty and hung by the neck until death. And if there was any justice in this world, you might want to invest in a cyanide tablet, Mr. Graham, because your future would be to be arrested and prosecuted as a war criminal, somebody who's advocating for a war of aggression, which the Nuremberg trial found to be the greatest of all war crimes, because from the war of aggression, all other crimes emanate.
Chris, while I'm talking to Scott, do we have that clip of Senator Graham that ends with Maduro better watch out? Not to raise your blood pressure, but it's an example of him exactly as you described. Here it is.
We looked at the JAG manual. Preventative self-defense employed to counter non-imminent threats is illegal under international law. So if we are not at war and these suspected criminals pose no threat of imminent violence, isn't this potentially a war crime to be killing the people on these boats and then to be taking out a leader?
No, not at all. I don't know what manual you're referring to, but I know what President Bush 41 did. He took down Ortega, the leader of Panama, because he was involved in drug trafficking, threatening our country. Venezuela is now partnering with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is running out of money because Iran is weak.
That's not new.
Partnering with drug cartels in Venezuela. No, it should have stopped. Here's what's new. You got a commander-in-chief that's not going to put up with this crap. We're not going to sit on the sidelines and watch boats full of drugs come to our country, we're going to blow them up and kill the people that want to poison America. And we're now going to expand operations, I think, to the land. So please be clear about what I'm saying today. President Donald Trump sees Venezuela and Colombia as direct threats to our country because they house narco-terrorist organizations. The leader of Venezuela is an indicted drug dealer in American courts. So, yeah, the game is changing when it comes to drug traffickers and drug cartels. We're going to use military force like we have in the past to protect our country. That's the new game we're playing, and I'm glad we're playing that game. And if I were Maduro, I'd find a way to leave before he goes down.
Person, a lawyer no less, has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, favors these murders. Does he know what he's talking about?
Not at all. First of all, Judge, you know this. An indictment is not a finding of guilt.
Correct.
In fact, at the bottom of each indictment, it says people are innocent of all charges until found guilty in a court of law. So Lindsey Graham's acting as if an indictment passed down by the Southern District of New York through a grand jury, which we know federal grand juries can indict a ham sandwich. The corruption of our legal system and the process is such that we can manufacture data, we can put it before a jury, and we can indict anybody in the world we want to of any charge we want to. And that's what we did, a politically motivated indictment against Maduro so that we can label him as such. But he's not guilty of anything. He's not been found guilty of anything. It's just probable cause through a grand jury process. And for Lindsey Graham to act now as if he is judge, jury, and executioner shows how this lawyer, who should be disbarred, by the way, for his flagrant disregard for due process in the Constitution, but it just shows you how low we have sunk as a nation, where we have a sitting senator who is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, acting as if we actually live in a land where, justice is a game, where we can do anything we want to because, my God, we can do it. That's not what America's supposed to be. And I also want to remind him that the president, has to go to Congress for this. This is not, the War Powers Act grants the president ability to engage U.S. forces under circumstances in which otherwise you could not approach Congress for a declaration of war. For instance, we're being attacked, or there's an imminent risk of being attacked. There is no imminent threat coming from Venezuela. That if we want to go to war against Venezuela and you think you can articulate the case, take it to Congress. Let Congress vote on this. But that's not what's going to happen. The president's just going to go forward and commit American troops to what's going to be a national nightmare.
Back to Ukraine. In the past 10 days, the president has imposed sanctions on two of the largest Russian oil producers. Are the Rosneft and Lukoil, are those sanctions going to affect the Russian economy or the special military operation substantially?
They're not going to affect the special military operation at all. The Russian economy, of course, will have to make adjustments. It's a new reality. But this isn't as though the Russian government woke up the other day and went, "Oh my God, they sanctioned Lukoil. We didn't see that coming." It's been threatened for some time now. Scott Ritter, before he became Secretary of Treasury, was saying, we're going to do just this. We're going to collapse the Russian economy. We're going to bring down Vladimir Putin. Russia's just a giant gas station with nuclear weapons, so we're going to deny them the gas. Russia's prepared for this, and they're making the appropriate adjustments as we speak. Don't believe the headlines you see. Russia still sells significant oil to India and significant oil to China, and that's not going to change. They're also selling significant oil to other nations in the global south. The one thing that Bessent maybe doesn't understand is that by doing this, you create market turmoil that Russia the ability to sell a couple 100,000 barrels of oil a day on the market. The oil that Russia is selling is, they're going to demand a higher price, which means Russia can outbid the competitors. One of the things that Russia can do better than any other oil producing nation in the world is sell oil at a discount, because it doesn't cost Russia as much money to get that oil out of the ground as it does, for instance, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and other nations. So Russia can steeply discount and continue the volume production that they're doing. This changes absolutely nothing when it comes to the strategic picture. What it does is further isolate the United States, because now we're in a situation where we have told the Indians, we run your energy security policy, and the Indians are taking umbrage at that. And Trump's going to try and put pressure on China and tell China you can't buy Russian oil. Watch how good that works out. Watch the humiliation that's going to take place when Donald Trump and President Xi sit down and start hashing out their trade relationships. China will not budge 1 inch on Russian oil. China's not going to budge on just about anything else.
Hasn't Trump's efforts to diminish Russia economically, in fact, enhanced Russia's economic independence and strengthened BRICS?
Look, the sanctions are serious. We let's not pretend that they're not serious. Russia, like any other nation, would prefer to function in an economic environment that's normal, based upon laws and contracts and things of that nature. But since 2022, actually since 2014, Russia's had to adapt to the world of sanctions, and they have. What's happened here is Russia's actually become a far healthier economy, because first of all, Russia continued to have to operate under the yoke of the Boris Yeltsin era oligarchs, these corrupt individuals who went in and bought state enterprises for pennies to the dollar, kopecks to the ruble, and amassed great fortunes, and then transferred much of their wealth outside of Russia. So instead of Russia generating wealth and having it reinvested in Russia, helping create growth, they were moving it outside, and they maintained tremendous amount of economic and political influence. Vladimir Putin, did crack down on some, but you can't crack down on them all. It's a reality of Russia that no longer exists, because after 2022, the West sanctioned these oligarchs, and Putin said, "You're on your own. You're the guys who made the decision to take your wealth. Your money you make gets reinvested back into Russia. That's it." And it changed the relationship with the oligarchs, and it also redefined how Russia functions. They no longer are dependent upon Western companies. Look at Boeing. Boeing and Airbus have committed suicide here because they've gone along with these sanctions. And what has Russia's response been? To build their own domestic airline industry that today produces competitive aircraft with 100% made in Russia components. This wasn't going to happen. Russia wasn't going in this direction, but because of sanctions, they had no choice. And all of Russia's industries that way today. Russia doesn't need the West anymore. That's why Russia is, in effect, sanctioned proof.
Is there developing in Russia? Now, you and I were just there for a week, and I didn't detect any of this. You have a lot more friends there than I do. And you were gracious enough to introduce me to your wonderful friends, for which I'm deeply grateful, as you know. Is there developing in Russia a sense of impatience military operation?
Look, Russia, believe it or not, has a relatively free press. There is a chattering class in Russia, especially in the blogosphere. And they have made their reputations and their money off of sniping at the Russian government, Vladimir Putin, Gerasimov, Belousov, before that Shoigu, the Minister of Defense. And so if you're looking for evidence of dissatisfaction in Russia, you can find it. But you need to be careful, because this chattering class exists for, it's the same thing here in the United States. We have a whole bunch of bloggers and people who exist to get clicks, to generate clicks, to get attention, to get viewership. And so they exaggerate things, they make things up out of whole cloth, but they aren't representative of reality, fact-based reality. The fact-based reality of Russia is that Russia as a nation is committed to victory. Russia as a nation is committed to victory. That victory doesn't come with a timeline. This isn't victory with a caveat. It has to be done by this date, that date, or this date. Russia as a nation is committed to victory, and Russia overwhelmingly supports the leadership that it has, who will deliver victory to them, and they are confident that this will be done the right way. They're not in a rush. The only people that are in a rush for this war to come to an end is in the West, because we're the ones you keep putting calendar. Russia's just in the business of getting the job done, and they don't give a damn about our calendar.
Given the economic and political weakness in Western Europe, and given the mercurial nature of Trump, one day threatening tomahawks, the next day saying no, how much longer do you think Zelensky and company can last? I mean, stated differently, how much longer can the Ukraine military last?
I want to remind people that Ukraine is the second largest nation in Europe after European Russia. It's bigger than Germany, it's bigger than France, it's bigger than Italy, it's bigger than Spain, it's bigger than all these nations. You're like, yeah. But I don't know what's going on outside. But the reality is, Ukraine is not a minor country. It takes a lot to defeat a nation the size of Ukraine with the resources that Ukraine has. Russia's in the business of doing that without, by the way, significant mobilization. There was one mobilization that took place in 2022 for 300,000 men. Since that time, Russia's sustained this conflict with contract recruitment, similar to what we do here in the United States with volunteers. Ukraine, on the other hand, is to their 7th or 8th mobilization. They've reinvented their military 5 times. That means rebuilt from the ground up with new troops, new equipment, hundreds of billions of dollars of investments. This cannot. Ukraine admits that Ukraine's economy is toast. There is no economy. Ukraine lives off of $120 billion of donated funds. Without this funds, Ukraine collapses. This cannot go on indefinitely. And I think the Russian targeted air campaign right now, which is taking out Ukrainian energy, is going to make for a very, very difficult winter for all of Ukrainians. And that's going to have a political impact on Zelensky's future.
I was going to ask you about General Apti, but I think I've been overruled by the dogs.
I think they're okay. You can ask the question. I'll do my best.
So I missed this dinner. Larry Johnson came away with his head spinning in a good way. That's how impressed he was with the general. And then he blew me away and told me, by the way, the general is not Russian Orthodox. The general is Muslim. I didn't know any of this. I knew he was a daring, dashing figure, but he has risen to such heights by.
Well, he's a Russian citizen, but we need to acknowledge that Russia is a very diverse nation. He is Muslim, a devout Muslim. He's a Chechen, ethnically a Chechen. Just so people understand the Russian-Chechen war, he fought on the side of Russia. His father, his brothers, his cousins, 20 of his closest male relatives were slaughtered by Shamil Basayev and the other Chechen rebels. And Apti Aladanov got his reputation by going into the mountains with this is not a man to be trifled with. Since 2022, he has led the Akhmat Special Forces in combat in Lugansk, helping liberate almost the totality of Lugansk. And then he became sort of the rapid reaction force. He's the man that surrounded Wagner in Rostov, and had Prigozhin not surrendered, Apti would have led the Akhmat Special Forces in and would have killed Wagner to a man. That's how good these guys are. He then went up to Kursk. He was the man who responded to the Ukrainian incursion in Kursk. He stopped them cold and then began the process of pushing them back. Operation Poltok, that pipe where the Russian forces crawled through the pipe to get into the rear of the Ukrainians and cause them to retreat. That was his plan. That was his men who executed that plan. And now today he's doing, this is a brave man, a very courageous man. I think Larry will tell you, I had mentioned once I had gone to dinner with him and Steven Seagal, and I made some offhanded comment about, yeah, you're a general. What do you know about being in the front line? You guys are back in the rear with the gear. And he pulled out a video that showed when his troops were pinned down and wounded, the evacuation troops couldn't get there. Apti went and got a BMP and rode in it, went in there and personally rescued these guys under fire, returning fire. One of his other men were wounded up. He patched the wound, put both men into the BMP, and then suppressing the enemy, they drew that out. That is a major general at the time. Today he's a lieutenant general. One of the
American generals don't do that.
No, and to be honest, that's not the way we operate. But Russia believes in leadership from the front. Opti commands the respect of his troops because of this kind of leadership. He cares deeply about them. And as he said, the Akhmat Special Forces have never voluntarily left a position, meaning they don't retreat. He said, stand fast and we advance. He's a highly respected man. He's a graduate of the General Staff Academy. He went there and and educated the rest of the Russian generals on the battlefield reality. He received a more formal education on staff work, and now he's working his way up the chain of command in the Russian military.
How much longer can Ukraine last?
Look, it's a big nation. I've been saying they're going to collapse for a couple of years now, and I've been wrong. How long can we in the West continue to sustain them? How long are we willing and able? How many, they're down now to where they're talking about drafting 18 to 23-year-olds. That's it. Once they exhaust this manpower pool, there's nothing left. It's the end of Ukraine. And the Ukrainians are starting to recognize this. So, I don't want to put a date on it. Ukraine will break. There's no doubt about that. Right now in Pokrovsk, 5,500 Ukrainian soldiers are surrounded, and they're not going home. In Kupiansk, 5,000 are surrounded. They're not going home. Up and down the front line, there's other smaller pockets that are developing. This is a plan Russia's been putting in place for some time now. And as they close the pincer on these pockets, there's a potential of 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers being trapped. Now, most of those will retreat, but the point is Russia's dominating this battlefield like it's never dominated before, and Ukraine is simply running out of the resources needed to plug the holes. I guess the question is, how long will it take to kill the last Ukrainian?
Great observations, Scott. Terrific observations this week. Of course. Coming up at 3:00 this afternoon, Phil Giraldi, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom. Scott Ritter, welcome here, my dear friend. Before we get into NATO collapsing and its relationship to Ukraine, the Gaza neo-colonial, Steve Witkoff, Tony Blair, Jared Kushner development deal, whatever you want to call it, why would anybody trust the United States and Israel to negotiate with? They murder the people that negotiate with Israel.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. Why would anybody enter a negotiation of this nature? One, I think it's imperative that Hamas keep Israel on its back foot, and Israel is on its back foot. Understand this: there would be no Trump deal if Israel thought it was winning this conflict. This deal is only possible by the fact that Hamas's resistance is ongoing, sustained, and unbeatable at this juncture. Israel, again, when they started this ground offensive, this was the final offensive. No more deals, no nothing. We're coming in, we're killing everybody. And yet now they're stalled. They're losing, two or more tank crews a day. Other guys are getting knocked off with snipers. Hamas is unconquerable. And so Israel has no choice but to go forward. But we know that Israel doesn't negotiate in good faith. The guys that are negotiating on behalf of Hamas were the ones Israel tried to kill in Qatar the other day. But it's imperative for Hamas not to allow Israel to paint Hamas into a corner. Hamas must be seen as being willing to do that which is necessary to achieve a peace deal. And so they will. I hope and pray that it works. I mean, if we can get a ceasefire, if we can have the Gazan people stay in their homes, if we can get the Arab world to rebuild Gaza, if we can get Israel to withdraw, if we can move towards a Palestinian state. I mean, these are all, the objectives that Hamas set out when they began this crisis back on October 7th. But history shows that Israel is incapable of living up to any deal. Israel doesn't want peace. Israel needs war. Netanyahu needs war. His peace is his enemy. If there is peace, Netanyahu will be kicked out of office, arrested, and put in jail for the rest of his life. So this is a man who's looking for war. But he also recognizes that Israel's in a very, very bad position right now. Not only is its military not succeeding, but its economy is floundering. And more importantly for Netanyahu, he's losing the support of the United States. It's slipping away. I mean, it's like, melting like hot wax. Trump has noted that, the iron grip that Israel once enjoyed on the U.S. Congress isn't there anymore. And we saw with the whole Charlie Kirk thing, Christian evangelicals, Christian Zionists are starting to question, if you're an American, how can you support Israel? And Netanyahu's in an absolute panic. So there's a possibility for peace here. But again, as you said, I don't trust Israel, and I certainly don't trust the United States.
Why would Hamas give up the hostages and give up their weapons? That's the two are their only negotiating points.
Well, the hostages, I think, at this juncture have served their purpose. The purpose of taking the hostages to begin with was twofold. One, to lure Israel into Gaza and let Israel be Israel, which Israel has done, committing genocide and alienating the world. If people don't recognize the strategic victory Hamas has achieved here, then they're ignorant of the reality of the Middle East. Israel today is a reviled nation around the world. Nations are kicking Israeli diplomats out of their countries. Other nations are recognizing Palestine. Everybody except the United States recognizes Israel as a practitioner of genocide. And this is a huge victory for Hamas. And that was achievable only by the taking of hostages. And then the second thing was to use it to get Palestinians released. People need to remember that the Israelis are holding thousands of Palestinians hostage as we speak. These are people who haven't been charged with anything. These are women. These are children. They're being held by the Israelis, tortured by the Israelis, raped by the Israelis. And, Hamas wants them free. And so we're at the juncture now where, Israel has done what Israel is going to do. The world knows what Israel is, and Israel's not going to be able to shake that off. And, right now, the release of up to, I think, 1,200 plus Palestinians who are held hostage by the Israelis, held prisoner, are going to be exchanged. I think the utility of these hostages has run out. At this point, to keep them longer, Hamas runs the risk of being, painted as the bad guys. And, already around the world, Hamas is tainted by the United States and Israel as a terrorist organization. But much of the world recognizes Hamas as a legitimate resistance movement, freedom fighters. And Hamas wants to keep it that way. And I think at this juncture, from a humanitarian standpoint, there's just nothing further to be gained by holding on to these hostages.
Why would Donald Trump have said to Benjamin Netanyahu, stop the bombing in Gaza, and Netanyahu, having figuratively thumbed his nose at him and accelerated the bombing in Gaza?
Because Israel operates according to Israel. Again, I just want to reiterate to everybody, Israel's not a friend of the United States. Israel does what Israel's going to do, and they use America as a tool. But and we saw this. I mean, look, there might be a military argument here. I struggle to make it, but many of these operations are intelligence-based, planned in advance, and they have an execution timetable. And it may have been impossible or very difficult to pull the plug on missions that are already underway. We don't know the complexity of the operation on the ground, where they're ground controllers, where they're intelligence assets, things of that nature. So I don't know. I'm just trying to be kind here. But the bottom line is,
I understand that you're trying to be kind. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please, Scott. The bottom line
is Israel's going to do what Israel's going to do.
Well, what about the West Bank? Trump says they'll never annex it.
They already annexed it. I mean, if Trump's going to say you're never going to annex it, then Trump needs to pass a law, get Congress to pass a law that criminalizes the theft of Palestinian land and makes any American who steals Palestinian land subject to criminal prosecution when they return to the United States.
Would never pass a Congress bought and paid for by AIPAC.
Wouldn't pass a Congress bought and paid for by AIPAC, but as the president has noted, that Congress may not exist much longer. And when the reality of what these sellers have done, many Americans live in blissful ignorance about the horrific reality of these people. This is not an anti-Semitic statement. It's an accurate statement. These are Brooklyn Jews who have become radicalized, and they go to Israel for the sole purpose of stealing Palestinian land, murdering Palestinians, kicking them out of their homes, and then they settle there. They don't work. These are not gainfully employed people. They sit there and they receive a stipend from the Israeli government courtesy of the American taxpayer. Their health care's paid for, their pensions are paid for. Their job is just to steal land and declare it as part of greater Israel. And they're doing that. If the president's serious about not permitting this, then he needs to hold these people criminally liable for what they're doing.
Switching over to Ukraine, what is the current state of the special military operation?
The Russians have made it clear that they're carrying out a war of attrition, and their job is to kill Ukrainians, and business is good. The Ukrainians are dying by the bushelful. Every day in every sector, there's over a battalion worth of Ukrainians being killed. The Russians, are not losing anywhere near the casualties that Trump and Kellogg and Witkoff and others are claiming. It is a bloody war, high-intensity war. There are occasions when the Ukrainians do launch localized counterattacks where they achieved temporary drone superiority over a sector of the battlefield. And when you have drone superiority, it's a bad day for anybody underneath. The Russians tend to enjoy drone superiority, drone supremacy. But every once in a while, the Ukrainians are able to surge forward and get it, and you kill some Russians. The Russians have never denied that they're not taking casualties. But the Russians say that we can handle this. We've got this under control. Our casualties are far less than what the Ukrainians are. And Putin made a point of this in his Valdai statement. He said, we're focused on one thing. The army that doesn't have manpower can't fight. And the Ukrainian army is rapidly reaching that point. The Russians are in the business of killing Ukrainians, and they are doing it by the bushelful. And that's where we are. The Russians advance where they can advance. Every day they're taking, several more towns and villages. But their job right now is basically to deplete the Ukrainian military of manpower. And they're doing that in a very efficient, bloody, horrible way.
Is there disenchantment amongst Russian elites with the pace of the special military operation? Is there any pressure on President Putin, whether it's some elites or academics or politicians or military personnel or intelligence personnel to bring about an end to this?
Short answer is no. The long answer is, look, there are some residual elites. Before the special military operation, kicked in, there were political and economic elites who had ties back to the golden age of Western economic and political intervention, the 1990s. And they maintained a certain level of influence throughout Putin's formative years as president. And they've been a problem for Putin because, they represent a linkage to the West that isn't necessarily to the benefit of Russia, but politically Putin, couldn't delink them because there are consequences at the polls. Yes, Vladimir Putin is not a dictator. He is a democratically elected president. And if you piss off enough Russians, you don't win the vote. But because of the special military operation, the West divorced Russia. And these political elites became disenfranchised. Many of them fled, but many of them stayed. So I would say that there might be residual resentment amongst some of these elites, but they are so far removed from the center of power, it's not even funny. I know what you're talking about, and I'm not going to denigrate the person who put forward this theory so far off base. That person needs to go to Russia. That person needs to meet with the elites he's talking about, not look at Russia long distance through Russian television programs. Sit down with Russians, meet with the Russians, see the reality of Russia, and see the reality of the the broad spectrum of support that President Putin enjoys amongst the Russian people, elites and non-elites alike. The President Putin's under no pressure from anybody. This man is as pressure-free as he can be.
Well, I agree with you. You and I have been there. We will both be there very soon. But the person we're talking about actually used the unthinkable word coup, as in C-O-U-P. I mean, without naming names, that person who's a respected individual used that word. I mean, I got a lot of pushback from our friends in Russia over that. I don't subscribe to it. You don't subscribe to it, but he does.
Well, I mean, the beauty of living in a free world is that you have freedom of speech and you get to say what you want to say, but you need to be held accountable for it as well. There is no evidence whatsoever that there's anything remotely resembling the C word taking place in Russia today. Just the opposite. The big C word that exists in Russia is corruption. And there is, residual corruption from the time when Putin became president back in 2000, when he was first elected, up through, the mobilization in 2022, when, troops were sent to the mobilization centers only to find that the people managing them had taken the money that was supposed to be used to buy uniforms and maintain weapons and everything and put it in their pockets, bought new cars and new houses. And the Russian, that was a big wake-up call. And to this day, you see senior bureaucrats being arrested for corruption. This is a problem, but Putin is cleaning it up. The Russians are cleaning it up. Sometimes there's overreach, and I think my friend Alexander Zurianov was caught up in overreach. But by and large, the big boogeyman hanging around, Vladimir Putin's presidency was corruption, and that's being cleaned up. And the more he cleans up corruption, the stronger his hold on power is. Remember, this is not a dictator. This is a man who rules because the Russian people love him. And the last time I saw a coup take place in a nation where the people supported their president democratically by over 80%, you've never seen a coup take place.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Listen, I like and I respect the person who made these allegations. He just looks at things differently than the rest of us do. And I have seen from talking to you and other people in Russia, in Moscow, people you and I will be with shortly, not a scintilla of evidence for this. No. Is NATO collapsing?
Well, NATO's been collapsing for a while. I mean, NATO, the collapse of NATO, one could say, began at its birth when it was created for no reason, to artificially, sustain a crisis environment that could keep the United States in, keep the Russians out, keep the Germans down. That was what Lord Ismay said, one of the first Secretary General of NATO. But NATO's heyday was during the Cold War, during the 1970s and 80s, when it became sort of the premier defensive alliance and the military alliance the world has ever seen. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the justification for this alliance went away. NATO's been struggling ever since. And through that struggle, it's primarily a political struggle, economic struggle. It's not a military struggle because NATO didn't have any real enemies. And so the NATO military atrophied over that time, and they became addicted to American weapons. And American weapons just aren't as good as everybody thinks they are. And so now we have NATO, with militaries that can't fight, can't get out of the barracks, addicted to an American weapons, supply chain, which has now been proven to be unreliable. Because what happens when America's ally Israel starts banging off weapons and needs it? The weapons get taken from other allies, the ones in the Pacific and the ones in Europe. It's done. And then NATO itself, is part of a European elite that has committed economic suicide by delinking Europe from Russian energy, and the economic consequences are horrific. So as Europe collapses, NATO collapses, and they're both collapsing right now.
Does NATO have weapons funded or produced by the United States, or does the U.S. military in Europe have these weapons? I mean, there is no NATO there's a commanding general of NATO, but there's no NATO army, is there?
Well, actually, I mean, there is NATO forces. There's forces. Every NATO member has a military structure, And some of these units are earmarked for NATO. So they have NATO missions, NATO assignments, and other units.
Are there U.S. Army and Marines in Europe not subject to American generals, but subject to NATO generals?
No, NATO generals are American generals. The United States isn't subjected to anybody but the President of the United States. That's just the way it works. There's not going to be a foreign general that orders American troops to do jack. That's just the reality. The commander of ground forces in Europe today is an American, 4-star General Christopher Donahue. And it will always be an American, because we're just not going to allow foreigners to order American troops into combat. It doesn't work that way. If there's going to be a war in Europe that involves American troops, the President of the United States is going to make the decision to make that happen. Not the Secretary General, not the military committee of NATO, nobody. That's just a reality. I think the biggest, where you see America's influence the largest is in air power, because air power has been where NATO has been investing a lot of money. You see the F-35s, and again, it's done, for financial reasons. It's done to help Lockheed Martin or whoever the hell makes that aircraft make them a lot of money. We sell the F-35s, we sold the F-16s, and such, but we also sold Patriot missiles. We sold artillery systems. But what they're finding is that the United States has strings attached to everything. And sometimes those strings are attached to, walls that get pulled in place to shut down the supply of weapons. Patriots. Europe isn't going to see any more Patriots. Those Patriots are going to go to Israel. They're going to go to the United States, both in terms of replenishing what we need in Europe, because now we're waking up to the fact that if there is a shooting war with Russia, we need a heck of a lot more missiles than we have. And also, if there's going to be a shooting war with China, we need missiles, and we just don't have them. And so the United States is basically saying we're shutting down that pipeline for you.
Is Ukraine going to get Tomahawks from the United States?
No, first of all, they'd never get them directly from the United States. The discussion that appears to be taking place is that the Netherlands, and if you saw the Netherlands Prime Minister was just in Ukraine today doing a solemn march with Zelensky, celebrating or being sorrowful about the losses and all this. And the Dutch have been big talkers about how they're going to support. And the Dutch in 2023 said they wanted to buy the Tomahawk. The Tomahawk sales were approved in 2025. Money has been allocated. It's been tested on Dutch ships. And in 2028, the Tomahawks will begin to be delivered to the Dutch. As the president has said, we will sell weapons to NATO, and then NATO can decide to do what they want. So the route for the Tomahawk to come to Ukraine, if it does, will be through the Netherlands. But that decision hasn't been made yet, because the Dutch would have to commit military resources to assist the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians aren't trained up on this. They don't know how to use them. And then the Dutch would also have to make an argument for accelerated delivery of the Tomahawk, because waiting until 2028 for the Tomahawks to come to the Dutch and then for the Dutch to deliver them to the Ukraine, there won't be Ukraine back then. Ukraine is desperate now, right now. If they were going to ever have the need for a long-range strike in a hope and a prayer of getting the Russians to come to the negotiating table, it's now. Now it's a futile thing. It isn't going to happen. If they used the Tomahawks, it would be a nuclear war and we'd all be dead. But the vector wouldn't be from the United States to Ukraine. The vector would be through a NATO country. And right now, the only NATO country that is in the procurement process is the Netherlands.
Here's the hothead to whom you referred earlier. We've seen this clip, but we'll play it again. General Donahue saying how easy it would be for his troops to take over Kaliningrad.
If you look at Kaliningrad, and it's, you can argue back and forth, but it's about 47 miles wide, surrounded by NATO on all sides. There's absolutely no reason why that A2AD bubble, to deter Russia, we cannot take that down from the ground in a time frame that is unheard of and faster than we've ever been able to do. We've already planned that. We've already developed it.
Apologize, never withdrawn. Why the hell would he have said something like that? That's this past summer. That's just 3 months ago.
I think he said it because he came into office realizing that NATO was very weak, very weak, and his job is to project an aura of strength. And so I think he was ordered to say this. Chris Donahue's smart enough to know that he just can't get ahead of NATO planning and what America is willing to support. And so, he was ordered to, we seek peace through strength. And the idea is to appear strong and make Russia feel vulnerable by projecting a potential threat to Kaliningrad. The hope would be that Russia would divert resources to Kaliningrad that otherwise might go to Ukraine or go up to St. Petersburg, where Russia's putting in a new, military district opposite of Finland. And I think that's the purpose. But the bottom line is he just doesn't. I can't say he doesn't know what he's talking about, but the words he say isn't reflective of reality. Surrounded by NATO. Did he realize that the NATO that surrounds Kaliningrad is the Baltics and Poland, and that neither one of them possess the kind of offensive strike capacity that Donahue is speaking of? If any of these nations tried to crack the Kaliningrad nut, they'd be slaughtered in a heartbeat. But moreover, Donahue needs to understand that Kaliningrad's not some sort of throwaway territory. It is the Russian Federation. It is Mother Russia. And if you go after Kaliningrad, it's like going after Moscow, and you're going to die. And that's what I said to Chris Donahue when he made that statement, is you just committed suicide, because there is an Iskander-S, that's a new missile, or there's an Oreshnik that has your name on it. You won't live. You're the command and control of this operation, of this insanity. And if you gave the orders to execute Operation Reduce Kaliningrad, bubble, you die almost immediately, because Russia will take you out with weapons you can't defend yourself against. This is the stupidity of statements like that. I know why he made it, and I have enough respect for Chris Donahue to recognize that he was put in a very difficult situation, and he doesn't believe a word of what he said.
Here's President Putin last week, very articulate, very knowledgeable, talking about tomahawks. Chris, number 6.
It's dangerous. As for the tomahawks, it's a powerful arm. Perhaps not the most modernized, but it's powerful. Poses serious threat. This will not change in any way the balance of powers on the battlefield, the fundamental issues of the armed forces of Ukraine, no matter how many UAVs they get, and no matter how many lines they create with those UAVs. Without the personnel, there will be no one to lead those battles. They have to change the tactics. Will this pose damage to our relations? Where we see light at the end of the tunnel, of course. Of course. Using tomahawks without direct involvement of the U.S. officers is impossible. Which means a brand new stage of escalation, even in the relations between Russia and the U.S.
We even have them to give?
Oh, we have tomahawks. We could give them, but we're not going to. And like I said, we're not going to give anything to Ukraine. That's not how this works. NATO has to buy the tomahawks, and then a political decision has to be made by both NATO, by the NATO country involved. And again, I mentioned Netherlands being the only candidate for this, and the United States. So we have to give the Netherlands re-export authority. But we also have to get Congress.
When he says they can't be operated without the personnel, he must mean without American personnel, because of the top secret information needed to operate them.
If it's there's certain tomahawk, yes. I mean, the ones that we use, the ones we gave to the Brits, they have all this. We're selling tomahawks to Japan, and we're going to sell tomahawks to the Dutch. And the question is, do these variants have the same linkage? Do they require an American footprint on both? And I think the answer is no. And so this export version of the Tomahawk could, in theory, be made available to Ukraine without American hands. It wouldn't be as effective. The targeting would have to be, derived from NATO sources and things of that. You wouldn't have to have the Americans doing the crypto. They would use their own crypto. But in theory, you could come up with an export version that doesn't require American troops. But if anything happened today, if they suddenly, it could only be with America. And this is the danger that people need to understand. Putin opened the door to a 1-year moratorium on New START, which is going to expire tragically on February 5th of next year. The treaty's gone. And unless we keep that cap in place of 1,550 warheads, we're going to go into a strategic nuclear arms race. It's going to see the number of warheads quadruple almost overnight. And ultimately, we'll have this arms race where new weapons are being deployed. Very dangerous situation. Putin has said he'd like a 1-year moratorium so that the United States and Russia could talk about what's next, how to keep this under control. But as he pointed out, that will not happen if the United States facilitates the transfer of Tomahawk missiles. And again, the Russians have been very good about acting on reality, not on intent. They're very calm. They don't go off on rumors. They don't, no one's been successful in provoking them into any major escalation. But when we're talking about a nuclear capable missile being provided to Ukraine, that violates every, facet of Russia's nuclear doctrine, which says, by the way, just so people understand, if a nuclear power provides a non-nuclear power with the means to attack Russia, Russia will treat the attack as if coming from the nuclear power, and it will prompt a nuclear response. So no matter how you spend this thing, providing Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles makes the United States the enemy, and it clears Russia to use nuclear weapons, which is the last thing we want. So we need to stop this talk. This needs to be nipped in the bud. Last December, President Trump gave an interview to Time magazine about Biden signing off on the ATACMS missile and providing the intelligence for that. It's the exact parallel of what they're talking about here, giving the Tomahawks to Ukraine, giving the intelligence to do deep strike. And at that time, Trump said, this is insanity. This could lead to a war, and it could have. And he said, I will never support this. And at that time, Congress, the members of Congress, Republicans, put forward a House resolution designed to prohibit President Biden from going forward with the ATACMS and providing the intelligence. Congress needs to do the same thing now. They need to be consistent, because what the president's administration is talking about today is the exact parallel of what Biden was talking about back in December, but worse. It's an escalation, and Congress needs to step in right now and say, not just no, but hell no. You're not allowed to sell the Tomahawk to anybody, and you're not allowed to provide intelligence information that would facilitate the targeting of the use of weapons into Russia, because that is literally an act of war.
If some Russian intel officials or military lieutenants are looking at a radar screen and they see Tomahawks in the sky coming to Moscow, can they tell if they're nuclear armed?
No, I mean, there might be some other intelligence indicators if they know exactly where it was launched from. And I think bottom line is, if Tomahawks are on the way to Moscow, you have to assume they're nuclear, and that's going to trigger something. I mean, I can't speak for the Russians. They've shown historically to be very responsible and very mature. We've avoided global annihilation on several occasions because of the reticence of Russian officers to, pull the nuclear trigger. And so I'd like to believe that the Russians will continue to be mature, but Tomahawks to Moscow? Come on, Judge. What if I said that, a Russianik to Washington, D.C.? How would you expect Congress to respond? How would you expect the president to respond? How are the American people supposed to respond? Oh, it's okay. It's just an Oreshnik. It only took out the Capitol. It only took out the Pentagon. Don't worry about it. The Lincoln Memorial, gone. Don't worry about it. It's just an Oreshnik. You send a Tomahawk to Moscow, you're hitting one of the most historic cities in the world. You're hitting the capital of Russia. I mean, what are the Russians supposed to be willing to give up? The Kremlin?
Nothing.
St. Basil's? The Bolshoi? You hit anything in Moscow with a weapon of that nature, and all hell is going to be broken loose, just as it would if somebody hit Washington, D.C. with a missile of the same level. People need to put on their thinking caps real quick, because this thing's getting stupid fast.
General Kellogg should stop talking about President Trump authorizing Tomahawks.
He should be fired on the spot. He had to Kellogg actually had to walk that statement back the next day. He was in a security meeting in Warsaw, And he had to say, "Oh no, it's just speculation. That I can't speak for any deliberations taking place in Washington D.C." Then why did you? He's grossly irresponsible. I mean, this is a man who was literally decorated by Zelensky as a hero of Ukraine for the work he does for Ukraine. And, we need to recognize who he works for. He doesn't work for the United States. He works for Ukraine and Ukrainian interests. And the proof is in the fact that he ran his mouth in such a grossly irresponsible way. He should have been fired on the spot. People have been fired for far less. Back in the lead up to the Gulf War, the Secretary of the Air Force made a statement about, the upcoming air campaign, speaking about what we were planning on doing to the Iraqis in Desert Storm. And he was fired on the spot. He doesn't get to talk like that. Keith Kellogg is speaking literally on behalf of the president, should be fired on the spot. He is grossly irresponsible.
Scotty, thank you very much, my dear friend. Great conversation all across the board. Much appreciated. I will see you soon, but we look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Coming up, one more today at 4 o'clock on all of this, but mainly on Israel and Gaza, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom. Scott, welcome here, my dear friend. Thank you especially for this second segment with us this week in light of the rather tumultuous events involving the Secretary of Defense, who refers to himself as the Secretary of War. Before we get to Pete Hegseth, since you are such an astute student of Russia, I want to play a statement that President Putin made shortly before spending 5 hours yesterday with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, and ask you how you interpret it. Please pay attention not only to the words, but also to President Putin's body language. Chris, cut number 12.
We are not planning to go to war with Europe. I've said that 100 times already. But if Europe suddenly wants to go to war with us and starts it, we are ready right now. There can be no doubt about that. The only question is, in what way? If Europe suddenly starts a war with us, I think it will be over very quickly. This isn't Ukraine. With Ukraine, we're acting in a surgical, careful manner, right? So that, well, you get it, right?
Surgical, careful manner, war will be over quickly. Why would he have said something like that within an hour or two of meeting Messrs. Witkoff and Kushner?
Well, before that statement, he made some other statements about, Europe wanting to strategically defeat Russia. How can we even begin to negotiate with such people? He said. I think what you're seeing is a very frustrated Vladimir Putin, frustrated by the fact that Europe is just committing suicide. Remember when the special military operation started, Putin would take phone calls from Macron. He would take phone calls from Merkel. He would listen. He would, people could actually travel to Moscow and meet with him and have discussions. But in the 4 years that have transpired, he doesn't talk to the Europeans anymore because they've basically opted out of rationality, opted out of sanity. And now you have Europe sitting there talking about the head of the military committee, this Italian admiral, talking about preemptive strikes against Russia. And so I think Putin was just frustrated by it all, and his anger showed. It's curious, what he said, because it's something that people just aren't reflecting on reality. Outside of Kazan, there's a factory that is producing 1,000 of the new geranium missiles, Geron 2s and 3s a day, 1,000 a day. Russia will use on a big day against the Ukrainians about 550. Usually it's around 300, 400. Where's the rest of those going? And they've been producing 1,000 a day now for months. They're going into strategic reserve. When Putin says that It will be over. We're ready right now. Understand that Europe has no air defense, none, zero. They've given it all to Ukraine. And Marco Rubio gave away the farm a little while ago, where he said, we'll give them 2 or 3 Patriot systems, and a week later they're all destroyed. Welcome to reality. So all of Europe's air defense have been stripped. All of NATO's air defense have been stripped, sent to Ukraine, where it's been destroyed. There is no defenses. And so right now, what Putin is saying is we can unleash 30,000 drones a day against Europe, and you can't defend yourself, and it won't be surgical. We're just going to take everything out. 30,000 drones a day. They could probably sustain this for 7 to 8 days, 210, 250,000 drones that there's no defense against. And this is in addition to the Oreshnik, which is now operational, the Iskander-S, a long-range version of the Iskander missile, which nobody's talking about, the 9M729, who has its range extended to 1,200 kilometers. Russia can touch every part of Europe with the systems that Europe can't defend itself against. So I think Putin was just basically frustrated. It's like, watching a child do stupid things. And after a certain time, you have to say, you're going to fool around. You're going to find out. There will be consequences for your actions, and they'll be severe. And I was putting Europe on notice that if you want to play this game, Russia will resolve this problem instantaneously. No mobilization. Russia doesn't have to take a pause and get a week or two to assemble its forces. They're ready to go right now. They have strategic drone units that have hoarded, a significant number of these Geron 2 drones, and they'll just flood the skies of Europe with weapons that Europe can't defend themselves against. And that's the reality.
Wow. One last question before we get over to the Secretary of Defense. Do you think the Russians take seriously the 2 real estate developers that Trump has dispatched, Witkoff and Kushner? And do you think it's even conceivable that an agreement could come out that would please both President Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky?
Well, first of all, Zelensky doesn't matter. Why mention his name? He's not a part of this discussion anymore. Neither is Europe. There's only 2 parties that count, and that's Donald Trump and that's Vladimir Putin. And there's only 2 voices that count right now. Notice that Marco Rubio is not part of this process. Also notice that Sergei Lavrov is not part of this process, not because Lavrov's on the outs, but Lavrov's counterpart is Marco Rubio. That's standard diplomacy. We're outside of the standard diplomacy realm right now. We are talking about, big picture economic thinking. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are the guys that can sit down and have the kind of personal, private conversations with Kirill Dmitriev and Ushakov, the presidential advisor to Putin, about these issues. Jared is as close to Donald Trump as Ushakov is to Vladimir Putin. And they're not talking about, Zelensky and peace plan. They're talking about what happens when the war is over, because I think there's a widespread recognition on the part of Trump's inner circle that the war is over. Russia has won, and there's really not anything that can be done. Trump has told Zelensky, accept the peace deal, because if you don't, there won't be a Ukraine left. And this is the reality. Vladimir Putin's forces right now are prevailing across the battlefield. They're advancing quicker than they've ever done before. They can't be stopped. And they know this. So the only conversation to be had right now is what happens when the shooting's done. See, Russia wants a post-conflict reality that resolves the issue of sanctions, resolves the issue of frozen assets, and resolves the issue of territorial integrity and legitimacy. This means that the conversation they're having right now is, how can we bring this war to an end, get the West to recognize Russia's sovereign control over the 4 new territories of Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Lugansk, and Crimea. No different colored maps, no, we're going to hold on to this until later. Russia owns and controls these territories. How can we lift all the sanctions so that the United States and Russia can engage in the full spectrum of economic interactivity worth trillions of dollars? And how can we get our frozen assets unfrozen so that Russia can once again, with confidence, participate in the international banking system? Because right now, Russia has no confidence in that. This is the talk that Witkoff and Dmitriev are having, that Kushner and Ushakov are having. They're talking about the post-conflict reality where Russia and the United States are global leaders without any restraints, no sanctions, no residual sanctions, no hint of sanctions, no punishment, know nothing. This is the conversation they're having. It's the conversation they have to be having. This is the only conversation.
And then what is the origin of that wacky 28-point plan?
The wacky 28-point plan is a Keith Kellogg invention. This is a residual Marco Rubio, Keith Kellogg to get Europe engaged. But Europe doesn't engage responsibly. This is the first thing that Trump saw, is that when first of all, the 28-point plan was leaked. It wasn't the whole plan. There's a whole bunch more to this plan that's there. It was leaked for the purpose of undermining European confidence in this peace process, to tear it apart. And Trump is fed up. Why do you think Rubio's not in Moscow? Because the 28-point peace plan, it doesn't exist in reality. There's aspects of it that they don't see eye to eye on. So they're focusing on that which they do see eye to eye on. And this is the reality that they're talking about. And I think Witkoff and Kushner came out of there confident that that they are headed in the right path, that there will be a peace. It's not going to be a negotiated peace. It's going to be unconditional surrender on the part of the Ukrainians with some residual guarantees. It'll quickly go away. I've read deep into this plan, and what Europe thinks they're going to get and what Ukraine thinks they're going to get are two totally different things, and what reality is going to dictate.
All right, moving over to Pete Hegseth, I'm going to play three tapes for you. One is Pete when I knew him and worked with him at Fox News. He appears to be giving a speech to an audience. It's not a Fox product. And in it, he says that illegal orders should not be obeyed. The second is Pete Hegseth the day after the attack on this boat, in which first the boat was destroyed and then the second attack resulted in the killing of the two survivors. That's Pete talking to his and my former colleagues on Fox and Friends the morning after. The third is Pete trying to obfuscate what he knew and when he knew it at a cabinet meeting yesterday. We're going to play all three of these together. Collectively, it's less than a minute. Chris, number 18.
There are some guys at Leavenworth who made really bad choices on the battlefield. And I do think there have to be consequences for abject war crimes. If you're doing something that is just completely unlawful and ruthless, then there is a consequence for that. That's why the military said it won't follow unlawful orders from their commander-in-chief. There's a standard, there's an ethos, there's a belief that we are above what so many things that our enemies or others would do.
I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat, we knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war.
All right, your reactions from what we have seen of him, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into what is expected of professional military men and women.
First thing you have to understand is Pete Hegseth knows he committed a crime. He knows this in his heart of hearts. So because we saw that in 2016, he knows what the law of war is. He knows what the Department of Defense law of war manual says, and he knows what the duty and responsibility of officers and enlisted men who have taken an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He knows that you can't obey an unlawful order. He knows this. I think people need to realize that here we are the first week of December. The incident we're talking about took place on September 2nd. At that time, the commander overseeing this was a lieutenant or a vice admiral named Frank Bradley. He was a commander of Joint Special Operations Command. The Tier 1 Commando Unit operates out of Fort Bragg. They had operational control here. And there was an ethos at play. It's sort of interesting to hear Hegseth talk about an ethos that, let's go back. Do you remember when Hegseth summoned 800 flag officers and senior enlisted and put them in
Quantico? He made a fool of himself trying to pretend he was George Patton.
Correct. But basically, the problem with that speech is that it can be used at trial and probably will be used at trial to show intent, because there's two war crimes that took place on September 2nd. The first war crime was the order from Trump through Hegseth to kill them all, take no prisoners. And if you listen to that speech and parse it down, he's talking about we're not going to be held by ridiculous rules of engagement. Our job is lethality. We're going to go in there, we kill things, we break things. This is what we do. We ask for forgiveness later kind of attitude. Stupid speech, criminal. But it appears that, again, the president echoed the same sentiment. And then you have a situation where the orders have been given. Now, the commander of JSOC at the time, Bradley, he comes from an organization, SEAL Team 6, that has huge ethical problems. These are guys that canoed people. You can Google that if you want to. Talk about Robert O'Neill and what he did to Osama bin Laden. He didn't kill him. He just blew his head open. It's just a SEAL trademark, a red team trademark. These people murder people. They committed horrific crimes in Iraq and in Afghanistan that have been covered up. The SEALs are a corrupt organization, morally, ethically corrupt. And so here you have this guy, Vice Admiral Bradley, who came through SEAL Team 6 from 1999 up through 2015, was a participant in a command function in all of the crimes committed by SEAL Team 6. And now he's there, and he's been told by Hegseth to kill them all. And so he did. And on September 2nd, in violation of law of war, he ordered a second strike. And remember, this wasn't in the fog of war instantaneous. Hegseth condemns himself. Hours of digital sensitive site exploitation. That means that they were poring over the video. They saw the survivors, and they killed them with a deliberate second strike designed to kill these people. It's a complete and utter violation of the law of war. You can't do it. They are hors de combat. They're out of the fight. There's no gray zone here. This is black and white war crime that was committed by a Navy SEAL giving orders to SEAL Team 6, who long ago forgot what their ethics are. Now, he was replaced on September 23rd. Bradley was promoted up. I think he's the commander of Special Operations Command today. He was replaced by Lieutenant General Jonathan Braga. Braga's Delta Force, completely different beast. And Braga did a complete revamp of the way JSOC operates because of the September 2nd crime, which resonated throughout the chamber. I'm just here to tell you right now, everybody knew a war crime had been committed. And this is why Braga changed the whole approach. And on October 26th, maybe, there was a strike against a narco-trafficking submarine. And they blew it up. And lo and behold, there's 2 survivors. And JSOC helicopters come in and rescue them and take them to a ship. See, the whole operating procedure changed because you had an ethical leader come in and say, we don't kill them all. We obey the law of war. This is how we operate. And, so again, Hegseth has to be careful here because this case will not survive trial. He will be found guilty of 2 war crimes, and he will be, a clear element. You know this, Judge. Intent is everything. What is your intent? Did you intend to commit a crime?
Right.
He intended to commit a crime. So did Bradley. They knew what they were doing was wrong, but they had this ethical foundation that said it doesn't matter. We're America. We're narco. We're the new military. We're tough. We're bad. We kill them all. Well, you may go to jail for the rest of your life, Pete Hegseth, and you should.
Here's him condemning stupid rules of engagement in that rather flamboyant speech to all of the flag officers a few months ago. Chris, number 7.
We unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters. That's all I ever wanted as a platoon leader. And it's all my E6 squad leaders ever wanted, back to that E6 rule. We let our leaders fight their formations, and then we have their back. It's very simple, yet incredibly powerful.
He just condemned himself, Judge. You know that. If I played that tape before you at trial, the intent to kill, the intent to be lethal, the intent to disregard rules, law, maximum lethality. He just condemned himself. He is guilty as charged. He's a dead man walking.
Here's a White House reporter asking the press secretary, who's not a military person and she's not a lawyer, was the second follow-up strike lawful? Chris, number 9.
You said that the follow-up strike was lawful. What law is it that allows no survivors?
The strike conducted on September 2nd was conducted in self-defense to protect Americans in vital United States interests. The strike was conducted in international waters and in accordance with the law of armed conflict.
She did was read a statement that somebody wrote for her, but it is ludicrous for them to suggest self-defense. These two guys are clinging to some pieces of wood that 2 hours before was their boat. What threat are they?
No, I've been, reading a lot, and we are dealing with the fog of journalism right now because there's a lot of cover up taking place, a lot of panicked people. But what's clear is that the President of the United States, working with Department of Justice lawyers, has crafted a legal argument that makes these narco traffickers a threat to the United States that justifies military intervention. Okay, so, you and I can argue that and all that stuff, but the bottom line is, if I'm a military commander, understand you're not allowed to obey an unlawful order. But if the order that comes to you, you have to presume is lawful, and it's gone through, a Department of Justice review, and you have the Attorney General of the United States signing off saying you're allowed to hit these boats and kill them, treat them as the enemy. That's an order you must obey. You don't get to judge the constitutionality of that. So this initial strike that was done, you and I can both disagree with that outcome. I believe that it's wrong and all that, but the president has lawyers who has come up with specific wording drawn from the law of warfare manual that gives authority to carry out these strikes. That's fine. The moment the ship is sunk, the moment you have survivors in the water, there is no debate here. This is law that comes down from experiences from the Second World War, where I think the Lanconia, a ship that was sunk by the Germans, contained Allied and Italian prisoners of war, thousands in the water. German subs surfaced to rescue them, but then U.S. bombers came in and attacked them, and they abandoned these people. German officers, submarine commanders, were arrested after the war, not because of this, because of other things, and tried and executed for shooting sailors in the water. Americans, the video that I saw as a second lieutenant, American submariners shooting Japanese merchant sailors in the water, because that's what we did. In 1949, the world said, this is not what we do. We don't do this. And the specific, straight up, if you're in the water, you're out of the fight. There's no debate about it. There's no gray zone. There's nothing. You are out of the fight. You're in the water and you are protected. And it doesn't matter if you're a merchant marine, a sailor, or a narco trafficker. You're in the water. You're out of the fight. You must be rescued. And that's where this is patently unlawful, what she did. She just doesn't know what she's talking about, frankly speaking.
What happens to Hegseth next? The DOJ is not going to prosecute him. It'll be up to Trump to fire him.
There might be enough political pressure put on Trump that he has to fire Pete Hegseth, and then Pete Hegseth will get a pardon. He won't go to trial. This, and neither will Bradley. Bradley may be relieved of command, but this won't go to trial. Who else?
Bradley should, in light of what you told us about Bradley's ethos, Bradley should be tried. It should be a public court-martial.
It should be, but it won't be, because to do that, then you'd have to bring in Hegseth and Trump. Remember, Trump is implicated here because Trump has given multiple speeches about kill them all, kill all of them, kill them, kill them, kill them. That's commander's intent right there. But remember, the people that actually did it are the SEAL Team 6 operators. They're criminals as well. They won't be tried. But they've gone too far into this. I do think that there is going to be congressional inquiry, and the data will come out. There's a reason why we rescued 2 people on October 26th. And the reason is the military system, which is staffed by honorable men and women who know the difference between right and wrong, they recognized that something horrible had happened, that the United States had committed a horrific war crime. And the system cleaned itself. The system put in place new rules of engagement. Fortunately, we had a very morally grounded officer, General Braga, Delta Force, who said, this is what we have to do. And they cleaned it up. But there will be a record. There's a record of investigation. There's a reason why U.S. Southern Command Admiral resigned and retired, because of this crime, this war crime. The whole system knows that something very bad happened, and the truth will come out. There is a record, a document of people questioning this strike, because you don't change your rules of engagement and your operating procedures on a whim. There had to be a reason. There's a reason why General Braga rescued 2 people and Admiral Bradley killed 2 people.
Here's a reporter in the White House press corps who has her finger on exactly what you just said. Chris, number 5.
So much of the concern from Democrats and Republicans is focused on the survivors. Why won't the administration either confirm or deny or reveal whether or not there were survivors after that initial first strike? And what imminent threat would 2 survivors pose who were clinging presumably to the wreckage of that boat?
Again, as I said, I think you guys are sort of not listening fully to the statement I've provided. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was totally destroyed and the threat to the narco-terrorists, to the United States, was eliminated. And for any further questions about his thinking, I would defer you to the Department of War. I obviously wasn't in the room for these strikes.
Just to follow up, Caroline, just on the administration's policy when it comes to survivors, was there a change in policy after this strike on September 2nd? The Washington Post is reporting that these 2 survivors were killed after a second strike, but then in October, 2 people were rescued and returned to Colombia and Ecuador. So was there a decision that was made to handle survivors differently after these strikes?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Well, she just read a statement that Stephen Miller probably wrote for her.
Yeah, well, she's not knowledgeable. First of all, again, in defense of her, she only can act on what she's been given. She's not a thinker. She's not. You know, her job is to read what she's been handed to her. But the fact is too that we're dealing with JSOC. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, or at least you used to have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, even though they existed. And everything about them, every procedure they do, every operation is classified top secret, because these are the tier 1, hostage rescue team, special operators. And so she won't know about internal doings. She won't know about the internal dynamic, what happened in the SEAL team. When these guys came back to their team room, the conversations they had, I can guarantee you that the morally inclined members of this team were not happy with what happened, and they reported up their chain of command, and it got to Bradley, and Bradley was in trouble because he understood that war crimes had been committed. And a process began that was then continued by Lieutenant General Braga when he came in to rapidly review and put in place new operating procedures so that the helicopters don't destroy the damaged, sunk, or debris and kill people. The helicopters rescue them. This became standard operating procedure. This doesn't happen in a vacuum, but the identities of these people, the designation, the tactics used, etc., are all classified top secret. And she won't know anything about this.
Well, Scotty, thank you very much, my dear friend. I did not know about General Braga. That is newsworthy, at least from our perspective, and it's great of you to have shared it with us. And thank you for double duty this week. And thank you for all your time, as always. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, thanks, Judge.
Sure. All the best. Coming up tomorrow, a full and busy day for you. At 8 in the morning, Colonel Tony Schaefer. At 11 in the morning, Colonel Douglas McGregor. At 1 in the afternoon, Professor Glenn Deason. At 2 in the afternoon, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. At 3 in the afternoon, Professor John Mearsheimer. At 4 in the afternoon, Pepe Escobar. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom. All right, we're back. Thank you, Scott, and audience and chatters. Thank you for telling us about these issues. It apparently was a YouTube problem, and hopefully we don't have it anymore. You were telling us how dangerous it is for the President of the United States to listen to neocons who happen to be ardent Zionists who whisper into his ear, and you were about to address the preposterous nature of what the president apparently said about an hour ago. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, they're all leading with this. Donald Trump says Ukraine can regain back its territory going to pre-war.
Ukraine won't gain back its territory going to pre-war. What Donald Trump has done is opted out of the peace process. The peace process is now dead, and with it dies the Ukrainian nation. Because there is no peace process, there is no prospect for peace. Ukraine, now emboldened by Donald Trump's irresponsible rhetoric, will continue to resist until the last Ukrainian, which has been Lindsey Graham's wet dream. And, when this war is done, and it will be done, this may last another year, but more than 3 million Ukrainians will die. The death toll will double because we're entering the final phases of the war where things are going to go very bad for the Ukrainians very quickly. And we will see more death and destruction. We will see the dismemberment of Ukraine. And if we're not careful, we may see direct conflict between Russia and NATO, which will be devastating for NATO. And then the United States has a choice. Do we trade Boston for Poznan? Because Poland is going to do something stupid and Russia will take out a Polish city. And then the United States has to make a decision. Do we commit suicide for an irresponsible Europe? This president is grossly irresponsible. Supporting this position only extends a war that can't be won by Ukraine. It only emboldens a NATO that won't be able to back up its rhetoric with anything meaningful, and only creates the potential of a conflict that will possibly draw the United States into a world-ending nuclear conflagration.
Chris, for the benefit of those who have just joined us and were not part of the show that we had to abandon because of the YouTube problems, can you put the full screen up again, which Scott analyzed, in which the President of the United States used that language? Okay, there you go. After getting to know and fully understand the Russia-Ukraine military and economic situation, fully understand. All right, I'm not going to editorialize, Scott, I'll let you do it. And after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win, WIN in caps, all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger. When the people living in Moscow and all of the great cities, towns, and districts all throughout Russia find out what is really going on with this war, pardon me, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to get their gasoline through the long lines that are being formed, and all of the other things, if you can raise that, Chris, thank you, are taking place in their war economy, where most of their money is being spent on fighting Ukraine, which has great spirit, and only getting better. Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries well. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. Good luck to all. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. You were saying that by this statement and a similar statement he made at the United Nations earlier today, the peace process, whatever was commenced in Anchorage, Alaska, is dead.
It's dead. It's finished. There's no hope of reviving it. Donald Trump has washed his hands of the process. He's walked away from it. And in doing so, he's, as I said, condemned Ukraine to die. But moreover, he's condemned the European economy to collapse and NATO to become even more speaking of paper tigers, it takes one to know one, I guess. NATO will become a paper tiger, unable to live up to any expectations and any obligations they may incur. But moreover, it just pushes the United States into a role of what? I mean, how can he possibly now talk about engaging in the normalization of relations between Russia and the United States? When he makes a statement of that, does he not know that should a NATO-backed Ukraine make a meaningful incursion into Russian territories, that Russia will respond with nuclear weapons? This is a trigger for nuclear action. That won't get to that, but again, what he's done is he's condemned, and by the time this is done, the Ukrainian death toll will double. 3.4 to 4 million Ukrainians will die because of Donald Trump. That blood is on his hands, and anybody contemplating giving this man the Nobel Peace Prize deserves to be locked up in an insane asylum.
Do you think that before he makes statements like this, before he composes a tweet, an X, whatever you want to call it, it's on his own website, which he calls Truth Social, that he takes guidance and advice from knowledgeable people, or is he just shooting from the hip or off the top of his head, just as he did at Charlie Kirk's funeral and just as he did in the United Nations a few hours ago?
Donald Trump is a morally and intellectually weak man, and he's a prisoner of the last person to talk to him. I don't believe Donald Trump's two thumbs typed this message out. I believe it's the job of somebody like a Sebastian Gorka, who hovers around Donald Trump listening to the advice, and then Donald Trump will say something and Gorka will turn it into a social media post that Donald Trump will then approve for release. Where is Marco Rubio when things like this are being said? Where is Pete Hegseth? Because Donald Trump just committed the United States to major foreign policy and defense policy, initiatives here. Is the State Department ready to back this up? Is the Defense Department ready to back this up? Is anybody ready to back this up? What does Steve Witkoff think of this? Because he's been effectively sidelined. How did Keith Kellogg go from being, fired literally a week and a half ago to now being the dominant guy running around getting medals from Zelensky? I just want to remind everybody about 2 weeks ago, he was in an award ceremony where Zelensky draped a medal around his neck, and he's now running around bragging about how Zelensky can, recapture Ukraine and do things. This is very dangerous. Again, anybody who thinks that Russia is losing this war, you need to go re-examine your facts and your data.
Is Trump's thinking deranged enough that he would consider putting American troops into Ukraine? I'm not asking you to be a psychiatrist. I'm just asking you to read between the lines of what he has said in the past 48 hours.
No, just the opposite. Notice at the end of that tweet, he was very careful, or whoever wrote that tweet for him. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do whatever they want with them. That's it. That's the extent. This is purely a transactional deal for him right now. There will be no American blood. America will not put boots on the ground. We aren't going to get our boys in, because at the end of the day, the Pentagon will tell him what everybody should be telling him, that we can't stand toe-to-toe with the Russian army as things stand. Neither can the Polish army, neither can the French army, neither can any European army. The only army that's capable of doing this is Ukraine, because Ukraine has developed drone warfare parallel with the Russians. Both sides have seen their respective capabilities to wage drone warfare, develop and mature simultaneously. They're both very dangerous armies. But Europe doesn't have this ability. And if, for instance, a Polish army was to go up against their Russian counterparts, or an American army, if the American military was to go up against the Russians, the American military would be bogged down and destroyed within days. They wouldn't stand a chance because they don't know how to fight drone warfare.
What would likely happen if a NATO country did shoot down a Russian jet fighter that inadvertently or even intentionally veered across a border over a NATO country? Take Poland as an example.
If it was over Polish airspace, nothing. I mean, Russia would clearly be in the wrong. But Russia doesn't have any aircraft operating near the Polish border. The Russians are very careful to avoid such a scenario. The 3 MiG-31s that Estonia claims violated airspace did nothing of the sort. They are in internationally recognized air transit lanes that have been used repeatedly by the Russians in the past. It's a clear provocation by Estonia. Now, if they were to shoot down a Russian aircraft operating in international airspace, the Russians would, respond as Russia would respond. I don't know. I mean, we saw what they did with Turkey. Everybody thought Russia would come in, guns ablaze, and all they did is put pressure on the Turkish president. So the Erdogan had to issue an apology and grovel before Putin because they were going to shut down the Turkish economy. I would imagine that Russia would not let the murder of a Russian pilot and the downing of a Russian aircraft go unanswered. But Russia is not in the business of deliberately escalating this conflict. Russia is winning the conflict in Ukraine. The best way to lose that conflict is to play Ukraine's game and get involved in a shooting match with NATO, because even though Russia would win, it would divert significant resources from the primary effort, which is bringing the war in Ukraine to an end.
Switching over to Gaza, Scott, will the near universal recognition of a Palestinian state in any meaningful way stop Netanyahu's slaughter in Gaza?
No. First of all, the recognition is meaningless. I mean, to say you recognize a Palestinian state to the 1967 borders and not put forward a plan on how you're going to compel Israel to abandon the settlements that they've put in the West Bank, that's stolen the land that would comprise part of Palestine, means that this is just an empty gesture. Moreover, not a single nation that recognized or said they recognized a Palestinian state recognized the legitimacy of Hamas as the governing authority of the Palestinian people. If there was an election today in Palestine, Hamas would win the election. And yet the United States, Europe, and everybody else is saying Hamas can't be part of the Palestinian future, which means you're basically, drawing lines on a map, but you're not willing to populate it with reality. And that just shows how disconnected these gestures are from reality. The bottom line is the thing that will get Israel to change its point of view are dead Israeli soldiers. And the bad news for Israel is that Palestinians, Hamas, continue to slaughter the Israelis on a daily basis.
And none of that is being reported into the West because the Israeli military doesn't allow journalists there to report it.
No, and it's also being suppressed what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinian people. I mean, every day, more women, more children, scores. Their shattered, torn bodies are being scraped off of the rubble of destroyed buildings. The genocide is real, it's active, it's ongoing. And the world's ignoring this as well.
Wow. Does Trump want, it's a silly question, but I'll ask it anyway. Does Trump want peace in either Ukraine or Gaza?
Not peace is in the way that you and I would recognize it. Trump wants to be seen as bringing an end to fighting. But if you think peace happens because you got both sides to stop shooting each other for a specific period of time, then you don't understand the nature of conflict. Russia has indicated clearly that there cannot be peace in Ukraine until the root causes of the conflict are addressed in full. No half measures, etc. Otherwise, you're just simply buying time for the war to continue. And now that Trump has told the Ukrainians that they should continue until they restore the 1991 borders and maybe go beyond, You know, Russia will never end this war until they destroy Ukraine. So that's that. On wanting a ceasefire that only embraces or adheres to Israeli demands. You can't have a ceasefire and seek peace when one of the warring parties, Hamas, will be excluded from this peace. I mean, it's ridiculous. So Trump, he doesn't understand what real peace is, and he's not working to achieve real peace. He's a charlatan. He's a con artist. He's trying to, buy his way into a Nobel Peace Prize by manufacturing, events he can label as peace, but don't do anything to bring the actual fighting to an end. And indeed, if they were implemented, only encourage future fighting. He's not a peacemaker. He's a warmonger.
How close are we to doomsday?
Well, Vladimir Putin just gave an interesting presentation to his Security Council yesterday, in which he basically said that the New START treaty is dead and will not be revived. The New START treaty is the last remaining arms control vehicle between Russia and the United States. It currently caps the respective nuclear arsenals of each side to 1,550. And once it expires on February 5th, 2026, both sides will be able to engage in an arms race to show you the immediacy of the danger. The Russians have long accused the United States of negotiating in bad faith for New START. And the proof is in the pudding. Repeatedly, generals and admirals of the Strategic Command responsible for our nation's nuclear forces have testified before Congress that as soon as the United States withdraws from the New START treaty, as soon as that treaty is no longer in force, the United States can almost immediately quadruple the size of its nuclear arsenal. We do so by, for instance, we have 450 Minuteman III missiles. Under New START, they've been downloaded to one warhead per missile. We would immediately put 3 warheads on those missiles, tripling the number of warheads available. We would reactivate silos decommissioned on Trident, on Ohio-class submarines for Trident missiles. These were supposed to be permanently decommissioned as part of the New START, but we only temporarily decommissioned because we lie through our teeth. The same thing, we would have B-52 bombers that were decommissioned as nuclear-capable bombers, converted into conventional bombers, instantly transformed because all we did is clip a wire, and you just have to splice that wire back together, and there goes the B-52. So overnight, we'll have 6,000 to 8,000 deployed nuclear weapons on board. This just begins an arms race that will escalate poorly and on behalf of the United States. Now, what Vladimir Putin did do is open the door for potential, resolution to this. He said that Russia will voluntarily adhere to the caps of the New START treaty, meaning that he will keep Russia's arsenal capped at 1,550, so long as the United States does the same and does not engage in any activities that are destabilizing in nature. Well, good Lord, the United States just said they're going to empower Ukraine to continue the war and maybe take the war on to Russia. So we may have killed Putin's offer from the very beginning. But the other thing is Donald Trump's talking about the golden shield, this theory of a ballistic missile defense system that can't work and we can't afford it. But if we go forward with that, the Russians will more than likely say, if you're going to build a missile defense shield, then we will have to build missiles capable of defeating your ballistic missile defense shield. And then we begin an arms race. So we are in a very, very precarious situation. And unfortunately, we don't have a president with the mental capacity or the moral integrity to see us through this. If we're not careful, we could find ourselves stumbling into a nuclear war with Russia.
Will there be serious negotiations for nuclear restraint of any sort? Or does Trump probably view this as some sign of weakness?
Knowing Trump, who knows what he'll view it as, but he won't view it in the proper light. The other problem is that he doesn't have the ability to negotiate. And I don't mean him personally. I mean the United States government. On July 25th, Donald Trump, addressing a reporter, said, we can't allow New START to expire. Well, guess what, Donnie baby? It's going to expire because you didn't do a damn thing. And one of the reasons why you didn't do a damn thing is a week prior to making that statement, you authorized Marco Rubio to gut the United States State Department. For all you MAGA types out there saying, they got to go, the State Department's got to be cut. 1,300 jobs are cut, many of them in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. That's the guys who do the research on arms control. And a lot of them came from the Bureau of Arms Control, from the Russia desk, the people that deal with Russia. And then after you cut them, he consolidated jobs. So, for instance, there was an Arms Control Bureau that does arms control. Now it's the Arms Control Bureau that also does counter narcotics and counterterrorism. And, we're sitting here manufacturing a war against Venezuela by blowing up tuna ships that we call, drug smugglers. You think this guy's number one task right now is going to be coming up with an arms control treaty? He's going to be overburdened. His boss was supposed to be, on negotiations and things of that. They've combined that job, but that boss doesn't even have a job because he hasn't been ratified by the United States Senate. So we don't have anybody sitting in the desk of the job that's supposed to oversee arms control. And then lastly, the whole team that does multilateral arms control negotiations, nuclear arms control negotiations, has been eliminated. So Donald Trump doesn't have anybody to do these negotiations. Even if he wanted to, we couldn't. This is an extremely dangerous situation.
And he's surrounded by yes men: Gorka, Vance, Hegseth, Rubio.
They're worse than yes men. Yes men might even have a brain attached to their ability to say yes. These people are fundamentally stupid about all things pertaining to the national security of the United States. Marco Rubio is a Russophobe. Pete Hegseth is a battalion operations officer operating well out of his depth. And Sebastian Gorka, he's a traitor to the United States. I'll just leave it at that.
Traitor to the United States?
Yeah.
Is he loyal to the government of another country?
He's loyal to the government of Great Britain. He's loyal to the government of Israel. He used to be an MI6 asset. He used to work for the intelligence services of Great Britain.
Wow.
That's why he was frog marched out of the White House in President Trump's first term because he was incapable of holding security clearance. But now Donald Trump has removed all checks and balances, and nobody's asking any questions. But this known traitor to America is now advising the president, probably writing his social media posts.
Scotty, you're a champion, and your knowledge is so broad and so deep, and I thank you for it. We had the original segment that went for 2.5 minutes until we had problems with the service provider. Thank you for coming back and doing this one. You and I will be together on Saturday. What are we going to be doing?
Well, we're going to be with our good friend Gerald Salante in downtown Kingston at the Four Corners of Freedom, he calls it, John and Crown Street in Kingston, New York, where there's a Peace and Freedom rally. We'll be joined by great speakers like Joe Loria, the editor of Consortium News, Dennis Kucinich, former congressman, former presidential candidate, and all-around good guy, Ray McGovern, former CIA presidential briefer, and Roger Waters is a well-known peace activist who's going to be joining us on live video feed. We'll be talking about a variety of issues, freedom of speech. We'll be talking about Gaza, Palestine, Russia, arms control, and what the hell we can do to save the world we live in.
Should be a very dynamic afternoon. And if any of you want to meet Scott, meet Congressman Kucinich, meet the great Ray McGovern, or meet yours truly, we will be there. This usually draws about 400 or 500 people. It's in a beautiful garden in a beautiful downtown area in a town that was founded in the 1600s, about a 2-hour drive north of New York City. If you live anywhere in this area, it'll be a most enjoyable afternoon for you. Scott, I'm sure, will be his eloquent best. I will do my best. The others are all experts in their fields. Scott, thank you very much for this. Much appreciated. You did double duty today, but deeply appreciated.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
See you Saturday, my friend.
Okay.
Thank you. Coming up, thank you for those of you who jumped from the original link to the one that we just used with Scott. I and my team very much appreciate the loyalty that you show us. Tomorrow, Wednesday, at 8 in the morning, Professor Gilbert Doctorow. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Aaron Mate. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Pepe Escobar. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom. Scott, welcome here, my dear friend. Before we start, to everybody watching, apologies for the internet issues. I understand my voice is coming through, but I look a little blurry, but it is me, and Scott is fine, and he does not look blurry, and he's just back from a long trip to Russia. I want to explore your understanding of the current sort of chaotic negotiations going on between the United States and Russia. But before we do, you recently published a fascinating piece that I couldn't stop reading on the Oreshnik. If the Kremlin decides that it must use this weapon, how potent is it, and is it stoppable?
Well, first of all, there's nothing in the Western arsenal that can shoot down the Oreshnik, so it's an unstoppable weapon. We don't know the full extent of its lethality, because apparently the warheads that they used, while they had the heat absorption capability, meaning they came in with extremely high temperatures at high speed, which in and of itself creates a dynamic kinetic effect. They didn't have the explosive aspect to it, which apparently uses new technology that can be extraordinarily destructive. So we didn't get to see the Oreshnik at full capacity. But the point is that this is a strategic weapon. It's an intermediate range missile operated by the strategic forces of Russia has never been used in combat before. This is the first time. It's the first time in the history of the world where a weapon of this capability has been used. Even what Iran used against Israel during its 12-day war doesn't match the lethality and capacity of the Oreshnik. Normally, when you are dealing with intermediate range missiles, you're dealing with nuclear armed missiles. And so there's an inherent barrier to their use, meaning that if a decision is made to use them, probably going to end up having a full-scale nuclear war at one point or another. By having this conventionally armed Oreshnik, you are able to climb up the escalation ladder, so to speak, to take that a next step of escalation before you get to nuclear. And this gives Russia unmatched escalatory capabilities. But it also means that there will be pressure on the United States and NATO to come up with a counter to this. And indeed, there's talk about next summer, the Dark Eagle, a hypersonic intermediate ranged missile developed by the United States, being deployed to Germany. This would give the United States the ability to strike the Kremlin with pinpoint precision 7 minutes after launch. Unprecedented. Even the Pershing 2, we're talking about 12 minutes back in the 80s. We're headed in the wrong direction here. We're headed in a direction where these horrible weapons are becoming easier to use. And it puts us closer to a hair trigger nuclear escalation reality. I know there's a lot of people out there that, like to say Oreshnik, but the fact is it's a very destabilizing weapon. And if we don't find a way to not only control it, but to be honest, to eliminate it, it's just going to be the harbinger of bad things to come.
Are we about to see another nuclear arms race like we had 30 or 40 years ago?
I think we're getting ready to see the intermediate nuclear forces version of that. I'm sure we'll talk about it. There's a 28-point peace plan that's been leaked out there. The veracity and the completeness of this plan is unknown at this time. But in those 28 points, there is a reference to extending the New START treaty as is. No new negotiation, extending it, and then beginning negotiations. So I do believe that the United States and Russia will find a way to prevent a strategic nuclear arms race. But what we're seeing is a repeat of the 1970s and 80s when Russia deployed the SS-20 intermediate range missile. At that time, an all-new technology. It transitioned Russia out of the liquid fuel models of the SS-4, SS-5 missiles of Cuban Missile Crisis fame, and propelled them into the solid rocket motor area, mobile missile with 3 nuclear warheads. Russia ended up building and deploying about 200, and that's 600 nuclear warheads raining down on Europe. And at that time, there was nothing that could match it. We responded by deploying the ground-launched cruise missile, the Tomahawk, and the Pershing II into West Germany, into Italy, into Great Britain. And we brought Europe to the brink of nuclear disaster. It was very destabilizing. Fortunately, sane heads prevailed, and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty was signed, and these weapons were eliminated. I was a proud participant in that process. But Donald Trump withdrew from the INF Treaty in 2019, and now there is no INF Treaty. And one of the things that I found is that while the Russians seem to be okay talking about their strategic capabilities, and heck, Putin came out there and gave a briefing about the Burevestnik. They published photographs of the Burevestnik. They published photographs of the Burevestnik in its production hall. They've talked about the Poseidon, published technical drawings of the Poseidon. The Yars, again, Russian television crews have been in the production hall of the Yars strategic missile, et cetera, the Bulava strategic missile. But when I made the recommendation that we need to, remove the transparent, we have to be more, Russia needs to be more transparent about Oreshnik so that begin these discussions about how to prevent a nuclear arms race. The Russians were like, nah, we're not revealing anything. We're not talking to anybody about this missile. We're not giving away any of the data. And this just creates even more uncertainty on the part of the West, more fear, or in some cases, sort of an aggressive cockiness, because there are many people in the West that believe that the Oreshnik missile that was fired by Russia on November 21st of last year was a one-of missile, that there is no capacity to produce it in mass numbers, that Russia isn't telling the truth about serial production, that this is just one big bluff. Again, a dangerous way of thinking.
Well, and of course it is Russia and President Putin himself who offered to extend the New START treaty beyond its termination just 3 months from now. So something's going to have to be done between now and February about the START treaty.
I think if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, both sides will just recommend the treaty cannot be extended. It doesn't allow for that. Now, they can do things such as amend the treaty, which gives them another extension. And you can do that if you don't touch the treaty, if you don't try to make the treaty into something that isn't. It probably could be done that the president could get the U.S. Senate to ratify an extension, and Putin could get the Russian Duma to ratify an extension. Whether they make that a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year extension, I don't know. But what it does is it buys time then for us to begin the more complicated, negotiations for a treaty that takes its place, that takes into account the Burevestnik, the Poseidon, the Yarzim, the Sarmat, all of the Avant-Garde, all these other missiles. But what's lacking in that is, for instance, anti-ballistic missile. The Russians just aren't happy with the way things are going right now. They believe that we have to have some sort of anti-ballistic missile treaty. This goes back to 2010 when Rose Gutemiller, the American negotiator, lied to Anatoly Antonov, the Russian negotiator, saying that just let us get past this New START thing, and then we'll sit down and we'll talk about anti-ballistic missiles. The Russian wanted it incorporated into the New START treaty. So the Russians allowed this treaty to go forward as a strategic arms only document. And then when Anatoly Antonov picked up the phone and called Rosa Gultemer and said, we're ready to begin the ABM talks, she said, no, we're just not going to do that. They lied, straight up lied to the Russians. The same thing with INF right now. There is no INF treaty. And the Russians have built some extraordinary capabilities. It goes beyond Oreshnik. There's other INF systems that are being deployed, being developed as we speak. Russia will have an overwhelming advantage to the United States over this. This will trigger an arms race, a very dangerous situation. And so these, in addition to a new START treaty, we're going to have our, re-engagement with the Russians on anti-ballistic missile and INF.
And why did Trump pull out of the INF in 2019? Because John Bolton told him to?
Well, no, it began during the Obama administration. There were accusations that Russia was cheating. They named a particular system, the 9M729 system, and they said that this was it was tested in violation of the range limitations. The Russians denied this, and the Russians actually set up a demonstration in June of 2019 to show that it wasn't that they were in fact complying. But the United States had already made up their mind. It wasn't that we were looking for an excuse because Donald Trump wanted to be able to deploy intermediate nuclear force missiles to counter China's advantage over those missile systems. And so he was looking for any excuse to get out of the treaty. And now he's out, and we're paying the consequence because we don't have anything to match China's capabilities. And now Russia has the Oreshnik, and we've got nothing to match that too. It was a fatal mistake.
All right. Let's get to Ukraine. Is this going to end? Is the military conflagration going to end on the battlefield or a conference room?
Battlefield. Ukraine's incapable of making the kind of compromises necessary. Ukraine continues to insist that negotiations be done that reflect that Ukraine is winning this war, that Ukraine gets to dictate outcomes. Ukraine gets to dictate nothing. Russia gets to dictate everything. Russia has indicated, and based upon leaked phone calls and everything, a willingness for a negotiated settlement. One of the reasons is, and this came clear and from my recent trip, is that while the Russian economy is functioning and doing well, the sanctions are causing problems. There's a cash shortage in Russia right now. They don't print money like we do. And literally the government is running out of cash to continue funding this war. And if they don't have this war ended by, say, middle of 2026, Russia will have to go into a war mobilization economy. Everybody says the Russian economy is going to collapse. They just have no idea what they're talking about. The Russians are capable of, moving out of this capitalist, kind of economy they have running now, venture capitalism, et cetera, and going straight to a mobilization war economy. They can make that transition overnight, and they can sustain the war forever at that point in time. But, that brings a cost to the Russian economy. That will require the Russian people to do some belt tightening, which they're fully capable of doing. But the Russian government would prefer not to do that. And so if they can, make this next step and get the United States to put pressure on Ukraine to end the war on terms, that are in accordance with Russia's demands, that would prevent them from making this transition. But Russia's fully prepared to go all the way. I mean, there will be no backing down on Russia. I mean, the stupidity of the Ukrainians, saying they want 800,000 men. Hell, they only had 260,000 when the war started. And Russia wasn't going to let, with that 260,000 included 68,000 NATO-trained troops who were being amassed on the border of the Donbass to preemptively strike the Donbass and kick the separatists out. Russia has said you're going to drop it down to 60,000. That's what Russia is going to allow. And since Russia's winning the war, those are the numbers. But Ukraine is talking about 800,000, Europe's first army, the largest land army in Europe. Fantasy. Every aspect of the Ukrainian demands are pure, unadulterated fantasy. Ukraine has run out of manpower. They've run out of everything. Their best brigades are surrounded, and Pokrovsk and Kupiansk are being slaughtered as we speak. There are additional cauldrons forming where the other experienced units are likewise at risk of annihilation. They're out of equipment. They're now sending equipment, because they lack trained formations and they lack adequate reserves. What's happening now is that, and the other thing that happened is they allocated, of course, billions of dollars to build fortifications behind these lines. All that money went in the pockets of people. No fortifications have been built. There is no fortified line anymore. So what the Ukrainians do now is they take their reserves, which had, this equipment that hadn't been upgraded for the reality of drone warfare. There's no steel spikes. There's no cage. They're taking these parade-ready units and they are throwing them in on these counterattacks because that's the only, they can't defend. There's no defenses. So they throw them into these counterattacks and they're being slaughtered. The Russians are just wiping them out. There's a highway to hell now. If you remember the highway to hell that was it existed during the Gulf War where the Iraqis were caught out.
That's the name of your book that I wrote the blurb for, isn't it?
Yeah, that's about highway to hell for nuclear war. But, we talk about the highway to hell that that the Iraqis got caught out with a vehicle bombed in front, vehicle bombed the wrap, and everything destroyed in the middle. There's a highway to hell out of Pokrovsk right now. They can't get out of Pokrovsk. And when the Ukrainians tried to go down this road, the drones are just slaughtering them. And the Russians released drone footage that just showed literally tanks, armored vehicles, everything, all burning out. There's nothing escaping from Kursk right now, nothing. And this is the reality. There's the Ukrainians right now, and this is why Secretary of Army Driscoll went to Kiev, and he said, you're losing this war. You're not going to turn this around. It's going to get worse for you. You have absolute military collapse coming, and there's nothing anybody can do to help you. You need to take these terms now, because if we walk away from this table, when we come back, there won't be a Ukraine, and that's the fact.
And is Ukraine also suffering a hemorrhaging of desertions?
Desertions, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have deserted. They grabbed 10 of these guys off the street, trained them. 8 out of the 10 either desert or surrender within days of being put on the front line. The other guys who go in there, they die. This is what's happening. The Ukrainians are just being slaughtered right now. It's such a one-sided fight. Now, again, it's not that they don't have the ability to counterpunch. One of the people that I was meeting with in Moscow, he provides logistic support to different units, and one of his units is what they call a Storm Z unit, one of the assault units. And I guess the unit fell in love with me, and they communicated with me regularly, but they now had to go on the attack. And the commander of that unit, who had communicated with me frequently, his unit got caught out. They had a bad day. There were 15 of them in this particular formation, and the Ukrainian drones got them and killed half of them. The other half, he had to hike because the Russians temporarily lost drone dominance. In order to get out, this man was badly burned by phosphorus, so the literally skin peeling off of his face and his arms. He had to walk 20 kilometers on his own to reach the point where the Russians could then evacuate him. So there's parts of the front line where things are tough. It's a very tough war. But overall, these are just limited little, Ukrainian, victories that have no strategic value, because what happened then after these guys got pushed back is the Russians then surge forward, get drone dominance, kill all the Ukrainians, and continue the attack. The objectives of the Storm Z unit were met. And so, war is a bloody thing, but the Ukrainians are getting slaughtered on a scale that is unimaginable. And at last, because Keith Kellogg was fired for incompetence, he is truly one of the most criminally incompetent men that's ever walked the face of the earth. He was a special advisor to Donald Trump. Secretary of Army Driscoll, now armed with the correct intelligence, is in Kiev reading the hard fact. The Ukrainians, they set up a deal with their war bloggers where they purposefully delay the news so that they're publishing old maps and things to disguise the reality of what's happening. But for instance, in Pokrovsk, they continue to lie that there's counterattacks, that they're operating. Pokrovsk isn't just closed by fire. The Russians have actually linked hand. There's now a physical barrier. Nobody's getting out of Pokrovsk alive. They're all dying. And the Ukrainians keep doing these counterattacks. They're just getting slaughtered. They're coming in and the Russians are just slaughtering them.
If the Kremlin, in response to the cash shortage, wanted to conclude the special military operation quickly and achieve its geographic and other goals, could it do so? Could it do so in a week or a couple of weeks?
No, even Vladimir Putin said, for instance, he talked about continuing the attacks, and he said, these other cities will fall. He said it may not be as soon as we would like, but the inevitability is they will fall. Look, we're getting into the difficult time of the year. Maneuvering is tough right now. There's the mud, King Mud right now, General Mud is there. But come wintertime, there's I received a wonderful invitation to go to the Russian Northern Expedition, they call it. Basically, it's the paratrooper unit that was sent into the Arctic to build up an Arctic warfare capability. The soldiers there apparently follow me, and I got a very kind invitation to come out and visit them. But these soldiers are, this winter, once the snow falls, the Russians are actually going to be pulling this unit out of the Arctic and bringing it in for very specific cold weather offensive operations. The Russians aren't about to let this war go on forever. They are going to put the screws on it. But the most optimistic people, look, the Russians now know that the Ukrainians are fully capable of fighting and dying because that's what they're doing. The Russians don't pretend that the Ukrainians aren't tough opponents. They are. But the Russians have never put a date on the calendar and said, this is when we need to do things by. But now there is a date because the reality is that the Russian economy, in order to keep this war level going, may have to transition into a war economy sometime in the middle of next year if this war is still going. And so there is an imperative to try and bring this thing to an end. But Russia's not going to do it by sacrificing troops on the battlefield. Russia will do it at the negotiating table by trying to confront the Ukrainians with the inevitability of their defeat and their demise, and telling the Ukrainians basically there's an easy way to do this or there's a hard way to do this. Right now, it looks like Ukraine's going to take the hard way.
How will President Putin react when Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, of all people, show up next week? Will he politely say, thank you, I'll listen to what you have to say, safe flight home?
I think he'll listen. But the bottom line is there will be, this is the point that I received over and over and over again. There is no room for compromise on critical issues. And it doesn't matter how badly Trump needs to understand that Europe is out. And I think he understands it. He's not working with the Europeans. And now Zelensky's desperate because he was supposed to meet with Trump. He says, I can't do it without the Europeans. And Trump's like, I don't care about the Europeans. They're irrelevant because they are. They're really irrelevant to this problem. They just undermine and try to drag this war out. It's Ukraine needs to be told that there will be dire consequences for failing to accept the Russian demands. And the dire consequences means the literal death of a nation. And Zelensky has to understand that means the literal death of Zelensky. This man is not long for this world.
Well, is he in a position to accept anything in the 28-point plan, or maybe it's down to 20 right now, or will he be assassinated if he does?
This is where we find out what kind of leader he is, because he will be killed if he signs this peace plan. He will be a dead man walking. There's no doubt about that. But is he going to save his life and sacrifice the nation? Or is he willing to sacrifice his life for the nation? And we'll find out what kind of, I think he's a cowardly, sack of manure who's going to, try to run at the end, but he won't get out of the country. They'll kill him in a heartbeat. Either that or he'll go on a fake diplomatic mission and never return. But no, it's finished. We're looking at the imminent collapse of Ukraine. The Russians basically have won the energy war. They've destroyed Ukraine's capacity to generate electricity. We're getting into the cold months of the year now. The Ukrainian people are going to suffer like they've never suffered before, and the Russians aren't going to take their foot off of the pressure here. You're looking at societal collapse combined with economic collapse, which will lead to military collapse. And, then the army will have no choice but to surrender or die.
Does the Kremlin understand that Marco Rubio has the same mentality as the Europeans do, that he and his neocon buddies, Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton, just to name a few, actually want the war to continue? They actually think that they can bleed the Russians dry.
I think that the Russians are fully cognizant of this reality. But the Russians, look, Lavrov, people say he got in trouble. I don't think he got in trouble. But he laid the law down to Rubio. Apparently the phone call that he had with Rubio was not diplomatic because Rubio was trying to play Keith Kellogg on. This is why Kellogg was fired, by the way, because Kellogg was pushing these talking points that, he earned by winning the big medal from Zelensky. I don't know if everybody saw the award ceremony. But Keith Kellogg is a traitor to America. He sold his soul to Ukraine. And he got, Rubio to continue to push Kellogg's talking points. And Lavrov set him straight in very undiplomatic terms. Pound sand, go to hell, get out of here. We're not doing this. What part of we're winning the war don't you understand? And that was a wake-up call for Rubio. And this is why you notice Rubio is not involved and he's not the lead on any of these negotiations. Witkoff is driving the ship right now. He's the guy. He and Dmitriev have set up a back channel that if this succeeds, and there's every indication that it could, if Trump is willing to, put the pressure on Ukraine that has to be put. This could go down in history as one of the great, back channel deals. RFK Jr. or RFK, I'm sorry, had a, back channel with Dobrynin to, get the Russian missiles out of Cuba and get the American missiles out of Turkey. Everybody forgets that part of the deal. Willy Brandt had a back channel with Brezhnev back in the 70s where it helped prevent the spread of nuclear weapons into Germany. And even more recently, again, during the Biden administration, we had CIA Director Burns meeting on a regular basis with Naryshkin, the head of the Russian intelligence service, SVR. They weren't able to promote peace, but they did maintain just enough communications to prevent a war. And I think Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev will go down in history as one of the great back channels of all time if they can pull this deal off.
Scotty, thank you very much, my dear friend. I appreciate your time. I know you just returned from Russia. Probably need a few good nights of sleep. Nights of good sleep. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, Judge. Thanks a lot. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. All the best to you. Coming up today on our Super Wednesday at 11 o'clock, Max Blumenthal. At noon, Professor Glenn Deason. At 1 o'clock, Colonel Douglas McGregor. At 2 o'clock, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. At 3 o'clock, Phil Giraldi. At 4 o'clock, Professor John Mearsheimer. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom. Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, December 11th, 2025. Scott Ritter joins us now. Scott, a pleasure as always, my dear friend. I do want to speak to you about American killers, also known as SEAL Team 6 and their bosses, Admiral Bradley and Secretary Hegseth. But before we do, one or two questions about the latest in Iran, in Ukraine, and the latest with Russian negotiations. Do the Russians take seriously diplomacy conducted by real estate agents?
Russia takes seriously the United States of America because we are a significant power armed with nuclear weapons. Certain aspects of the government structure takes seriously these real estate negotiators because they represent the President of the United States. But the vast majority of serious Russians are not happy with this. I just finished writing an article. It's on my Substack, Words Matter. It's based upon a fascinating dialogue I've had with Andrei Ilnitsky.
And you just finished spending about 3 weeks in Russia.
Correct, and I met with Andrei there. Retired Lieutenant General, former senior advisor to Minister of Defense Shoigu, responsible for information policy. He is the author of a doctrine or a thought process called mental war. He's the one who coined that term. And mental war is sort of a corollary of Gennady Gerasimov's hybrid war. People might remember in 2013, Gerasimov wrote an article that was misconstrued in the West. They said it was Gerasimov's doctrine, that this was Russian doctrine. No, what Gerasimov was saying is that Russia is subjected to hybrid warfare from the United States that uses unconventional means such as non-governmental organizations, media, etc., to undermine Russian society to create unrest that can facilitate regime change. And Ilnitsky has talked about, mental war that is a strategy of the United States to get the Russian people to lose confidence in Russia, to lose confidence in themselves. And it's a decades-long process that's geared to collapse Russian society from within. And the reason why I bring this up is when you have negotiators like Witkoff and Jared Kushner, look at the term they're using. Deal. We want to make a deal. This is a good deal. The Russians don't want to make a deal. A deal is subjective. A deal is temporary. A deal isn't honesty. A deal means that each side has their own opinion about what they want to achieve. They've just drawn four corners around some vague terms that they can shake hand on. But the Russian goals and objective in the deal could be very different from the American goals and objectives. And the Russians don't want that. What the Russians want is a binding treaty. And you're not going to get a binding treaty from Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and that's the problem. Even Vladimir Putin has said in the long term to have a new security framework in Europe and a new security relationship with the United States, it's not going to be about shaking hands and doing business. It's going to be about sitting down and negotiating very detailed treaties that are legally binding, and there are consequences for failure to comply. The United States has withdrawn from two major landmark treaties, the ABM Treaty and the INF Treaty, one dealing with anti-ballistic missiles, the other dealing with intermediate range missiles. And the Russians are saying, what good is a treaty with America? And if America can't respect a treaty, how can we expect them to respect a deal? And again, the closest thing to a deal out there is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which the United States had with Iran. It's not a treaty. It didn't go to the Senate. It was basically empowered through presidential executive order. It was a deal. And what did Donald Trump do when he became president? He broke the deal.
Right.
And this is what the Russians, this is a problem that the main part of the Russian government has. They like that Witkoff and Kushner are coming and talking. Dialogue is good. Remember, there was no dialogue under Biden. But they're not looking for a deal. They're not looking for a business relationship. They're looking for binding treaties, and the Trump administration just isn't in that mode.
So Trump is kind of in a box, is he not? He's got a Secretary of State who doesn't want the war to end, who hasn't participated in the negotiations. He's relying on a real estate buddy and his son-in-law who have zero diplomatic experience, who probably manifest ignorance of Russian history and culture, and who haven't even spoken to Sergei Lavrov. Right?
Well, Lavrov is the minister of the foreign minister. He's not going to speak to Witkoff directly. That's not his place. His job is to speak to Rubio. But Rubio's out of the game right now. And I'll tell you why Rubio's out of the game. He's out of the game because Rubio fell under the wing of the Scott Bessent crowd, the Keith Kellogg crowd. Rubio was selling, a bag of goods to Donald Trump, that Russia was being defeated. Their economy was on the verge of collapse. All we had to do is triple down on sanctions, keep supplying. The Russians are running out of manpower. And then Rubio had a phone call with Sergei Lavrov. Now, we don't know the exact details of this, but there's been enough hints dropped. Lavrov read Rubio the riot act, where Rubio tried to strong-arm Russia and say, look, you got to make a deal because it's only going to get worse. Lavrov basically said, what planet do you live on?
Yeah.
We're dealing with reality here. And the reality here is we don't need you. Fact is, we don't want you. We're going to win this war regardless of what you do. We don't care about you. I'm going to hang this phone up and we're going to keep moving forward and winning this war. And he did so. And there were ramifications because I don't think the Kremlin was ready to call it quits on the Alaska process. And that's why you had Kirill Dmitriev fly to America, go down to Miami and meet with Steve Witkoff to continue this dialogue. But Trump was read into that phone call, and Trump, I think, woke up and realized that he had been lied to. That's why he fired Keith Kellogg. And that's why he started to say things like, Ukraine has lost this war, that if Ukraine can make peace now or lose everything in the future, and the inevitability of a Russian victory and the inability of America to stop the Russians from going forward. So there's not going to be a negotiated settlement. What I'm here to say right now is that Russia will win this war by achieving the unconditional surrender of Ukraine, and the United States is okay with that at this juncture.
And are the Europeans crazy enough to think that somehow they can salvage Ukraine? Their latest scheme is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, or if you see this differently.
I think the Europeans right now, to be honest, are buying time. They're buying time. They're waiting for the midterm elections.
The American midterm
elections this coming November. They have been told by, and again, we have a lot of treasonous people here in the United States. I understand policy differences. I have many policy differences. But when you go and negotiate with foreigners to undermine the executive of the United States, you're committing treason. And you have Democrats and Republicans right now who are meeting with the Europeans. You have some people in Trump's cabinet who are meeting with the Europeans, telling them all we have to do is delay, hold on, survive until November. And then if Congress is flipped, then Trump will be stymied. And then all you have to do is wait the final 2 years, and then we can reverse all this. So that's what they're trying to do. They're in no position to create a war because they don't have any ability. What they're doing is creating political difficulties for this president, and they're trying to extend the viability of Zelensky. But it's not working because on the front line right now, the Ukrainian army is in near total collapse, and there's nothing that can be done to salvage that situation. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian energy sector is collapsed. Their cities are dark, and they have no money, none.
Yeah, their cities are dark and probably cold.
The Rada was told to pass a budget. How can you pass a budget when you don't have any money? And Zelensky's government is falling apart. So this strategy of holding on isn't going to work. And so you'll see the more desperate things become for the Ukrainians, the more harsh and shrill the rhetoric will be out of Europe. But be rest assured, Europe can do nothing to back their words up. They have
their latest stunt, and then we'll jump to the killings in the Caribbean. I'm sorry to say that so flippantly, but that's what it is. Their latest stunt, which came out of the meeting of Merz, Macron, Starmer, and Zelensky at 10 Downing Street on Monday, was new elections in Ukraine, monitored and security guaranteed by NATO. I mean, could you imagine Putin consenting to that? Could you imagine Trump consenting to that?
No. There will be elections in Ukraine. The elections will come after the capitulation of Zelensky. The elections have already been organized conceptually by the Russians. They know who the candidates are. They know how they want to facilitate it. They know what the outcomes are. That's what you get to do when you win a war. People are like, that's terrible. Well, the United States created military government to occupy Germany around 1943. And so as we rolled into Germany, every town, every city that we occupied, a military government moved in that had been preparing to occupy that city, that town, for several years now. And we had a black list of Germans that were going to be arrested, a gray list of Germans that were going to be monitored, and a white list of Germans that we were going to work with. That's what victors get to do. They get to dictate the outcome. And this is what Russia is going to do in Ukraine. So I'm not worried about any of this stuff. Europe has no ability to do anything without the backing of the United States. And if you just read the national security strategy of the United States put out by the Trump administration a week ago today, Europe's on the wrong path, headed towards civilizational erasure. So I don't think Trump's ready to, give Europe the sacred vow that Joe Biden did about Article 5. In fact, Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, said something fascinating the other day. He said, if Russia attacks NATO, a NATO country, the United States may consider to sell weapons to NATO. But that's it. We're not going to war for NATO. People need to understand that. We're done with this organization because we recognize that NATO is the bad guys. Russia is the group that we want to have strategic stability with. We need strategic stability so we can do what we want to do in the Western Hemisphere, what we want to do in the Pacific. Europe needs to wake up to that they're asking the Trump administration to ditch their entire national security strategy, to reverse course on policy prerogatives that Trump isn't going to do.
Moving to the killings in the Caribbean, federal law defines shipwrecked as persons in peril at sea. Admiral Bradley, for whatever reason, you can perhaps speculate or articulate, rejected that definition and ordered the shipwrecked to be murdered on October 2nd. This is indisputable. This is from people who heard he didn't use the word murdered, of course, who heard his 8-hour testimony before Congress last week. What should become of this next? in light of this rejection of the obligation to rescue the shipwrecked. And I don't want to lose sight, Scott, and I know you don't either, of the big picture. We're talking about rescuing 2 people. The whole thing is a criminal act. The concept of killing people that are non-combatants.
Yeah, I think we need to start with that there. There are so many people now. Social media is a very frustrating thing because while there are the opportunities to have informed discussions and dialogues and share information, it's also full of just people who shouldn't be invited to any conversation, ignorant people. If I hear one more, vet bro or some, wannabe tough guy who calls himself a Reagan conservative say, this is what I voted for, you do understand that doesn't matter, that your vote doesn't change the law. That's why we have a constitution, so that we have a rule of law and mob rule won't sweep in. That's why we have due process to protect, people who have been accused of crimes from lynch mobs. So I don't care that this is what you voted for, and nobody who has any authority cares either. And for those people say they're drug runners, why are we defending? Guys, it doesn't matter what you think. It's the law. And you do understand that narco trafficking is not a death penalty. We intercept guys running drugs all the time in the United States and on the seas. We don't kill them. We arrest them. What you're saying is because they're moving drugs now, we get to kill them. That's not what U.S. law is. And there's no military rules that allow you to do this. They're a drug. We get to kill. No, you don't. A shipwrecked person could be a pirate. It could be a terrorist. It could be anything. When they are shipwrecked at sea, they're protected. That's what the law says. You don't get to kill them. And what's happened now, we'll get into Bradley in just a second, though. There's a chilling effect, and I think it was November 13th, Hegseth announced Southern Spear, this big military operation. But things have slowed down considerably. Why? Because the military started to ask questions, tough questions about every aspect of this operation, everything they've been ordered to do. The military is starting to say, we need additional judicial review here. All the way up to the top, the president has signed certain findings that have a very creative interpretation of, defining a combatant and all this stuff. At the end of the day, you can't make somebody who is jaywalking the equivalent of an armed bank robber. And yet that's what we're trying to do here and say these guys running these drugs. And I have every reason to believe that these aren't fishing boats. I'll explain that in a second. I believe the U.S. government when they say we know what's on those boats. And I'll explain why I believe that. But we don't get to reinvent the law. The military has been asked to break the law. And these officers and men took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. They know what the rule of law is. They know what their obligations are under the law of war. And now they're starting to ask the questions. And this is why you saw the premature resignation of the admiral who commanded Southern Command. That's the guy responsible for the whole area. He resigned. Why? The speculation is that he was not going to carry out patently unlawful orders, which now begs the question, why was Bradley doing this? Why is JSOC, America's premier joint special operations command? These are the tier 1 guys that do hostage rescue and do all the sexy made for television stuff. They went in, they got Osama bin Laden, and they got, Baghdadi, and they get all the bad guys. Why are they involved in this? Because nobody else is going to do it. Because they can be tasked under, I think it's Article 10 or Article 51. One of them is for conventional military forces. The other one is for the CIA. And JSOC has the ability under law to be sheep-dipped as CIA, to operate outside of the military chain of command. So Bradley, the head of JSOC, is running this operation. One of the reasons why he's there is that the intelligence being used, and the reason why SEAL Team 6, you have to ask yourself, why is SEAL Team 6 doing this? We have a drone targeting a boat and a helicopter firing a Hellfire missile. Where does SEAL Team 6?
So why do you need SEAL Team 6?
Because SEAL Team 6 has a unit called Black Squadron. and Black Squadron is their intelligence and surveillance unit. And these are the guys that are on the ground in Venezuela right now, gathering the intelligence about what's on those boats. And these guys are very, very good. And they will have video, audio, physical samples. They will have biometric data. They know who's on the boats. They know what orders they've received. They know what's in the boats, and they treasure. But their existence, the mere fact that they exist, is shouldn't be talked about. Why are you talking about, Scott? Well, because it's in the public domain. Therefore, it's there. And you have to ask yourself, why is SEAL Team 6 involved? This is why, because the intelligence that's being used for these boats is closely compartmented, and the only people who are allowed to know about the existence of Black Squadron and any intelligence they collect is SEAL Team 6, dev group out of Dam Neck. And so that's why SEAL Team 6 is involved. They're the ones who are launching the drones. They have an ISR capability. They launch these drones, and these drones have a laser designation. The drones know where to go because they have trackers on the boats, and they're designating that. But they're the kill chain. And then the kill chain, the intelligence involved in that has to go up to somebody who is cleared for this intelligence. And that's where the commander of JSOC comes in, Bradley. So Bradley is the one that's involved, because otherwise there's no reason for the commander of JSOC to be involved in this. And there's no reason for SEAL Team 6 to be involved in this. This is a Coast Guard operation. But because the president of the United States,
why are these killers involved?
Because the president has given orders to kill them all. Look, President Trump was in Quantico when Hegseth gave that ridiculous speech, and that speech was: forget about the rules of engagement. We are a lethal, maximum lethality. We're here to kill, kill, kill. And he's done this repeatedly. And Trump came in afterwards and basically said, if you don't agree with this, get out of here, leave. And Trump has made statements about, we're here to kill these people. And he laughs about it. We're going to. In the National Security Strategy document that was just published, in there they say that we are turning drug running into an action with lethal consequences, and we're giving the military the ability to, use lethal force. That's an illegal order, an unlawful order in writing, and this is with the president's signature. So the president's given the order. Nobody's saying no. Somebody resigned, but Bradley said yes. And people say, well, what about Brad? I just want to remind people that Bradley joined the SEALs in 1999. And he went through Green Squadron, which is their selection squadron. He's tactically competent. He was with Blue Team when Blue Team deployed to Afghanistan in 2001. He was with the initial group of people. If you know anything about Roberts Ridge, Mako 30, Mako 31, and the performance of Blue Team and the war crimes committed by Blue Team. Blue Team is a war criminal outfit, and Bradley was part of it. He was part of it as a junior officer. He participated in the war crimes. He participated in the cover-up. And there's the thing. Why is Bradley doing what he's doing? Because this is what SEAL Team 6 has done its entire existence. It is a fundamentally corrupt organization that has created an ethos of banditry. I mean, these people, I think, black or silver squadrons, the pirates, or gold squadrons, the crusaders with the swords. Red is the red men. They carry axes and they go around. They canoe people, split their heads open. Ask Robert O'Neill, the man who didn't kill Osama bin Laden, took credit for it, though. He went in there, instead of killing the man, he just shot him in the forehead to split his head open, because that's the red men's signature. And then there's the Blue Squadron. And Bradley was part of it. They've committed war crimes everywhere. And Bradley was a part of Blue Squadron from 1999 till 2015. He's committed a horrendous number of war crimes, and that's his ethos. That's the way he operates. That's the way the SEALs operate.
Do these people have any fidelity to the Constitution and to federal law?
No, none whatsoever. They cover it up. There's a book out there, Code Over Country, that goes into great detail about this. The SEALs have long since, collectively, foregone any notion that they are loyal to the Constitution or the rule of law. They are a bandit organization, a pirate organization of killers who get off on killing. And when they get called out, they protect each other. They rally around one another. They put code over country. They think it's being more important to protect a SEAL than it is to protect the rule of law. And as a result, horrific war crimes have taken place all around the world. The guy who was involved in Roberts Ridge fight, I can't remember his last name right now, but he was a lieutenant commander. Why is a lieutenant commander on the ground? Because he wants to get bloodied. And he was so frustrated by what happened. Vic Hyder, I think his name is Vic Hyder, so frustrated by what happened, the defeat of the SEALs on Falcon Gore, that he participated in a raid on a convoy. It turned out to be a wedding party, and they shot it up, got off the helicopters, and he went down the ditch and shot wounded civilians, executed them so they couldn't talk because they didn't want any survivors. They didn't want any witnesses. That's SEAL Team 6. That's Blue Team. Vic Hyder was with Blue Team. Bradley was there. Bradley's one of the guys that covered it up.
Is Hegseth aware of these criminals in the military?
He has to be. I mean, I can't sit here and personally say that Hegseth is, but in his position, he has to know what I know. Because what I know, everybody knows. Everybody who's ever touched these organizations knows this about the SEALs. They're a fundamentally corrupt organization. Are there good SEALs out there? I don't know. That's like asking if there's good cops on the Baltimore Police Department when we know that the Baltimore Police Department plants evidence to falsely, convict people. If you're a cop and you're not planting the evidence, but you know that some cops are doing it and you're remaining silent, you're not a good cop. There's a lot of SEALs out there that haven't committed war crimes and who won't, but they know that there's SEALs who have, and they remain silent because it's code over country. And I condemn every SEAL. And I know that I'm going to piss a lot of SEALs off, but I don't care. I've been working with you guys since, 1991, and actually earlier than that, 1986. And you've never been anything but a bunch of brutal thugs, lawless thugs who do whatever the hell you want.
Is everybody in that chain of command guilty of a war crime, from the president of the United States down to the pilot of the helicopter, or whoever in the helicopter pressed a button that released the missile that killed the people in the boat?
You get into what's called the kill chain. To be guilty of a war crime, you have to intentionally, know you're violating. I'm obeying orders doesn't fly, but in the way the U.S. military works is because we are all trained on the law of war. We are to assume that every order given to us is a lawful order, and unless we can demonstrably show that it's not a lawful order, then we need to obey that order. Now, you want to make the call on your own, it's a career-ending choice. I've made career-ending decisions because it's the right thing to do. But you can't ask everybody. So until you review the evidence and you know what people were told, I can't sit here and absolutely say
you're instructed to kill unarmed, non-combatant civilians. Isn't that pretty basic? That it's wrong?
But if I'm a helicopter pilot though, and I've been told that I'm firing it on a laser designate, and that it's a lawful target, and I don't have the target, I can't see.
You may not know what the target is. Okay, right. Somebody along that line, from Pete Hegseth to Frank Bradley on down, at some point people knew who was
the people in the intelligence chain, for instance, the drone operators giving the feed to the staff. Bradley was in a command center. There are video screens. There should be lawyers right there. There should be operators right there. The people in the kill chain. And at any given point, somebody should have stood up and said, no, we're not doing this. I'm sorry, Admiral. Those men are shipwrecked, the definition. And a lawyer will come in and say, no, I've determined that they are combatants. That's when you say, put it in writing. And I'm putting my objection in writing. And I'm saying no. And you force the issue right now. Nobody did that.
Right.
Somebody may have said, why are we doing this? And then, because according to the Washington Post and New York Times, there was, a lawyer present who said, no, this is good. But understand, these lawyers are picked. Remember, in Guantanamo, we had a lot of military lawyers that said it was okay to do what they do in Guantanamo, to violate, they were wrong. The Supreme Court has come out and said they were wrong.
Correct.
So just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean that what you come out with is good and sound. And there are politicized lawyers, and that's one of the problems with the Department of Defense today, with somebody like Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of War, is that it's politicized. If you're somebody who isn't seen as facilitating the slaughter, then you're a troublemaker and you'll be removed and you'll be replaced by somebody who is going to facilitate the slaughter. So you get nothing but yes men. That's not good for the military.
So what will happen next if Trump doesn't fire Hegseth? If Congress rolls over, the House of Representatives already has, nothing will happen. This will continue.
Yeah, if there's no consequences, then they'll get away with it. It's up to Congress right now to, and I'm sorry to say it, but Bradley has to be tried and brought to justice. Now, the president may seek to pardon him, but that act alone will, create again. What I want right now is the chilling effect. I know this is sedition. People are like, "Oh, you're being seditious." No, sorry, I'm not. I'm just
not sedition at all. Your sedition is advocating violence to overthrow the government. That's not what you're doing at all. You're advocating rule of law.
Yeah, Mark Kelly, was accused, and 5 other Democrats were accused of sedition for daring to suggest that military officers failed to obey an illegal order. Bradley's probably wishing that he had listened to the seditious 6. It was Pete Hegseth who, in 2016 or 19, made the same statement, because it's just so blatantly obvious what your obligations are under the law of war. Bradley violated his obligations. He is a disgrace. He is a shame. He should be arrested, and he should be tried, reduced in rank. And I just want to remind people that under the War Crimes Act passed by Congress, I think in 1996, a war crime under the act is a grave violation of the Geneva Conventions. And a grave violation is defined by actions that lead to the illegal deaths of protected people. These shipwrecked people were protected, and Bradley ordered actions that resulted in their deaths. If found guilty, the mandatory sentence is either life imprisonment or death. That's how serious this is for all of you who said, this is what I voted for. Really? You voted for this? You voted for murder. No, you didn't.
We'll end it there, my dear friend. Thank you very much. Thanks for all of your intellectual honesty coupled with your military experience and understanding and the manner in which you brought this to the fore, Scott. I, too, am getting beaten up because of my views, which are identical to yours, but so be it. Somebody's got to stand up for the Constitution and the rule of law, and we're doing so on this show and elsewhere, where I believe we are deeply appreciated. Thank you, my dear friend. Have a great weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Judge.
Of course. The end of the day, the end of the week, tomorrow, 4:00, with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern, the Intelligence Community Roundtable. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom. Scott Ritter, welcome here, my dear friend. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. A short week for all of us because of Christmas on Thursday. Before we get to the EU and Colonel Bo and the significance of what happened to him without any due process, I want to ask you a few questions about China, because in the past 2 weeks, the following occurred. The Trump administration's national security strategy came out and referred to China as not an enemy, but an economic competitor. Good, probably true. The National Defense Authorization Act came out, which gives the Pentagon more than $1 trillion. And in that is $11 billion to Taiwan for offensive weaponry. And the United States seized last weekend a Venezuelan oil tanker destined to go through the Panama Canal and make its way to China. Do the Trump people know what they're doing?
No. I mean, I hate to be this blunt, but if you take a look at the people that they've staffed the national security positions with, in the past, we used to get, when we talked about Russia, we got Russophobes. I mean, people who actually hated Russia, a visceral hatred. Fiona Hill, she has no love for Russia. Christopher Ford, who was, negotiating arms control, he hates Russia and hates arms control, and yet he was the man responsible for negotiating arms control with Russia, which is why he ended up killing the INF Treaty. Today on China, we don't have Chinese experts. We have people who hate China, and sometimes their hatred just comes down to it's the Communist Party, therefore they are evil. They don't know anything about China. They don't know anything about Chinese policy. To them, simply, doing anything that can constrain the dragon is a good thing without any notion of what the consequences of their actions will be. The document may say they view China as an economic competitor, but the reality is if you treat China as an adversary, the rest of that document says, for instance, that the United States will be seeking conventional military overmatch in the Pacific. That means that we have said we are going to dominate China with conventional military power as a way of deterring any potential Chinese strike against Taiwan. Oh, by the way, we're giving $11 billion to Taiwan for weapons that are capable of offensive operations against China, even though we ostensibly endorse a one China policy linked to a decision by the United Nations that said China controls everything, including Taiwan. We simply don't know what we do. We don't know what we stand for. We don't know what our policies are. And it's going to come back to haunt us because the Chinese are ready. The Chinese are prepared, and the Chinese aren't afraid of us.
Isn't this military overmatch U.S. to China an impossibility?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, first of all, it's the Pacific. So you need boats. You need ships. The Chinese, punch out hundreds of ships a year. I think over 400. We don't come anywhere near that number. We're talking, on our submarine production, in order to maintain the status quo of existing submarine frames, we have to produce somewhere around 2.5 submarines a year. We're producing 1.7. And it's the same with our other, the keels that we lay for other ships. We just don't produce ships in the quantities or in the quality necessary to compete with China. One of the reasons why we got out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019 was because we feared Chinese overmatch in terms of intermediate nuclear forces, intermediate range missiles, 500 to 5,500 miles. And we were supposed to match them with the Dark Eagle. Well, the Dark Eagle isn't operational yet. It may be operational. We don't know. But even if it does become operational, when you look at it, it's a whole bunch of money to produce a missile at a rate of one per month that doesn't do very much damage. It's not a nuclear capable missile. So we've spent all this money. We've just destroyed arms control, destroyed global stability so that we can say, look, we have an intermediate range missile now we can deploy against China. It's not as powerful as a cruise missile, a conventional cruise missile. When we took out the Taji missile production facility during Desert Storm, we hit Taji with, over 100 individual cruise missile points. It would take 100 months to produce 100 Dark Eagles, and they couldn't do the damage that was done. This is how stupid we are. We are nowhere close to having conventional overmatch for the Chinese. The Chinese outclass us in every way, shape, and form when it comes to projecting power into the immediate region that they live in. China's not a world power like we are. They don't project, blue water navies halfway around the world. But China is very good at projecting power into the waters off of China, into the first island chain and stuff. They have unmatched conventional power, and we're not ever going to get near them. And so this is a bad strategy. We're going to just waste a lot of money, a lot of time to eventually realize, as we are with the Russians, that when we sit down with the Chinese, we actually have to take their legitimate national security interests into account. And sometimes that means that we have to back off of things that just don't make any sense. Just like we have to back off of Ukraine, we're going to have to back off of Taiwan pretty soon, because
we're putting missiles in Taiwan. We all know from history, although I was alive when it happened, when Russia put missiles in Havana, suppose Beijing puts missiles in Havana. Does the Trump administration expect that it would sit back and do nothing?
No. First of all, the missiles we're putting into Taiwan aren't strategic in nature. And the Chinese have the ability to take these out. That's the frustrating thing about this, is that we're spending $11 billion on giving Taiwan a capability that simply turns it into a target. Because all the Chinese are going to do is locate where all this material goes and then target it with, one of the thousands of ballistic missiles they possess that Taiwan will never be able to reach. Taiwan will cease to exist as a civilization, as a nation state, as a place capable of sustaining life before a single Chinese soldier sets foot on their soil. This is the reality. And it will happen instantaneously, so fast that the United States won't be able to mobilize. We don't even have a war plan for Taiwan now, because we're not allowed to have a war plan for Taiwan, because Taiwan doesn't really exist. It's not a sovereign state. So what we have is a modification of our war plan for Korea. But that war plan for Korea, to get 700 to 900,000 troops to Korea, takes months, if not years, in the total effort of the United States. We don't have those troops anymore. All the troops that are earmarked for that plan are doing other things. We don't have the ability to back up our rhetoric on Taiwan with anything other than nuclear weapons. And therein lies the rub, because the stupidity that we're getting ourselves into pushes us down a path that can only lead to nuclear confrontation. And when that happens, we all die. And, so it's a policy of suicide as opposed to a policy promoting, national security.
I want to move on to Russia, but I got to tell you, this crazy comment that you paraphrased, China's dangerous because they're communists. Well, I've heard this from Senator Tom Cotton, who's a graduate of Harvard Law School and sits in the United States Senate and whispers into the president's ear.
Yep, and you hear from Driscoll, the U.S. Army Secretary, who's apparently the coolest thing since sliced bread.
Oh, he's the heir apparent to
Hegseth,
when they realize that the Hegseth has been murdering people.
Well, and if you think Driscoll's going to do better, don't.
No.
He may not be the push-up and pull-up fanatic that Hegseth is, but his brain works just as well, which means it doesn't work at all.
What do you think Witkoff, Kushner, and Kirill Dmitriev are talking about? They can't be talking about whether Ukraine should be in NATO. That is non-negotiable. They can't be talking about whether Ukraine would be neutral and its military forces would be below 100,000. That's non-negotiable. They can't talk about the land of Russian-speaking people's return to Russia. That's not negotiable. What are they negotiating?
Look, I think the Trump administration has its eye on the post-conflict reality, meaning that they accept the fact that Ukraine and Europe are not going to allow this negotiation to go through. They'll go through the motions. They'll listen so they can't be accused of not listening, and they'll take the message to Dmitriev and to Ushakov and to Putin when they meet with him. And then the Russians will say the same thing, just what you did. No. But we got $1 trillion possibility in terms of the exploitation of, the North Arctic's wealth. We've got, another $1 trillion possibility in rare earth minerals. Man, when we finally get this thing going, it's going to be good for both of us. And that's what they're talking about. The other stuff is just show. You can talk all you want about security guarantees, but if there's not a nation left to guarantee the security of, it doesn't matter. And the way Ukraine's going right now, there's not going to be a Ukraine left by the time this is all said and done. They just assassinated a lieutenant general in downtown Moscow. It's an act of terrorism. And if you don't understand the Russians, and, because the Russians aren't going to, panic and do what America would do, lock the whole country down and shut down every airport and frisk every dog. The Russians will just get on with their business and do what they do. But they're writing down names. I mean, Budanov's a dead man. He's the head of the intelligence service that carried this out. If he doesn't understand it, he has zero life expectancy. He will not survive this conflict. And everybody with him will also pay the ultimate price. The Ukrainian leadership is a terrorist organization. The Russians identify them as such. And so they're sitting there negotiating a future none of them will have a chance to enjoy, because they're all literally dead men walking.
The Wall Street Journal reports that Trump is about to propose a high-tech Gaza, that Gaza will be turned into some sort of a glamorous high-tech facility, and they're soon going to be looking for investors. Alistair Crook says that there is no such thing as the Gaza ceasefire. Trump has lost control over Netanyahu, and when Gaza collapses, Netanyahu's going to blame Trump. How do you view all this?
First of all, it's pie in the sky. If Gaza was stable today, turning Trump's vision into reality is something that would have a timeline that goes well beyond, Trump's remaining 3 years in power. He doesn't have another term. And, it's questionable whether or not he's going to be able to do anything after November anyways. If he continues with these policies, there's a good chance that the Democrats will do well in the midterm elections and seize control of at least one house of Congress, probably the House of Representatives. And then it's back to paralysis. They will simply move to impeach this man over and over and over again, and he will be tied up, tied down, nothing he can do. End of his presidency, and in doing so, destroys the possibility of, somebody from, cut from the same piece of ideological cloth continuing these policies. So things like the Gaza technological miracle, it'll never get off of paper, even if things were going well, and things aren't going well. There is no ceasefire. Hamas has not been defeated. Israel is not prevailing. And this is going to go south. And Netanyahu is a politician. He will seek to blame everybody but himself for this. It's a disaster, but we're not allowed to talk about it, you see, because Trump got the FIFA, Peace Award.
Oh, right. He got a Peace Award from the International Soccer Organization, right?
Oh, yeah, but it was a Peace Award. I mean, and come on, this is Donald Trump. He renamed the JFK Center because he's Donald Trump. It's now the Trump Kennedy Center because Donald Trump is a cult of personality, and that's where we're at right now. We have a literal cult of personality where you're not allowed to say anything that denigrates or puts down, this larger than life character that now occupies the White House.
Wait a minute. The Russia-phobes in the State Department and the American deep state have always said that Russia has a cult of personality around Vladimir Putin. I mean, this is just the world turned upside down, Scotty.
Yesterday, I think, was Joseph Stalin's birthday, 147 years old. But there's a poster out there that said, yes, there was a cult, but there was also personality. Meaning that, and so yeah, you can say, if you want to say about Putin, there's a cult of personality, yeah, but there's a personality. There was a man who just the other day spent 4.5 hours answering questions from everybody, and he didn't fumble once. A cult of personality, though, is more emphasis on the cult. And that's what we have here in the United States. I'm not saying, everybody who I've spoken to who's actually knows Donald Trump says he's a very personable man. He's actually, he's the kind of guy that you could get along with. He's nice. He cares about you when you're in and all that. So I'm not here to say that he's the personification of evil, but he is a narcissist, a supreme narcissist, and
Yes.
he likes the idea of this cult of personality, and he encourages it. And unfortunately, he's surrounded himself with weak people who are not able to just tell him, say, no, boss, that ain't going to happen. That's not. You're setting yourself up for failure. See, he can do no wrong. He says things, and he can do no wrong. He's sort of the American equivalent of Kim Jong-un, who apparently, when he learned how to play golf, went out and played 18 holes and got 18 holes and won because he's Kim Jong-un.
What is the future of America's relationship to Europe? I mean, shouldn't NATO be disbanded? Shouldn't we get the hell out of NATO? And what do we care about the EU? It's hopeless.
Well, I personally believe the European Union is on the path towards irrelevance, and you will see Europe redefine itself as a collective of sovereign states instead of subordinate nations to this imaginary being called the European Union. NATO, likewise, is an unsustainable organization. I think that the collapse will come sooner than later and be directly linked to what happens in Ukraine. NATO cannot survive. People tend to forget that NATO had been dealt a fatal blow by Afghanistan and what the United States did to NATO in Afghanistan. We abandoned NATO. Nobody talks about that, how when Trump made the decision and Biden made the decision to get out, they just left the United States went around to Europe and did the old tin cup routine saying, raise money to keep your things going. Raise money. Oh yeah, we're out of here. Good luck. And that was a humiliation for NATO. And this is one of the reasons why they immediately turned their eyes on Russia to define Russia as this existential threat. Because if they hadn't, and NATO started talking about the reality of the diseased relationship between the United States and Europe, the United States and NATO, which existed even back then, the organization couldn't survive. So they manufactured a conflict in Ukraine with Russia to justify their continuing existence. But now they've literally gone all in on a losing hand. They're not going to win this. And when Ukraine collapses, that's literally the end of NATO. It will not survive the collapse of Ukraine.
I'm intrigued by the EU silencing this retired Swiss military intelligence officer, Colonel Jacques Bau. What can you tell us about this? They silenced him, meaning he's not allowed to speak out. He can't travel. They have seized his assets and his bank accounts, and we are told he has no judicial recourse to the seizure. How can that possibly be?
Well, because Europe is a dictatorship. I mean, it's a police state in every way, shape, and form. First of all, that which they have accused him of being a Russian asset, of parroting Russian position, it's just an outright lie. One of the things that made Jacques Beau what he was the fact that he used Western research to make the points that he made. It's just that the conclusions he's reached were uncomfortable for people who were not paying attention to the facts. But this man didn't travel to Russia. This man didn't appear on Russian media outlets. He didn't, meet with Russian officials to get the Russian perspective. He simply delved into Western data to point out the vacuous nature and reality of Western policy, which made him in many ways more dangerous than people like me who, extensively draw upon Russianary expertise and the Russian perspective. He draws upon the West exclusively, and the conclusions he reached are unimpeachable. And therefore, the only way they could deal with this man is to silence him in the most, the only other thing that would be worse than this is actually imprisoning him and killing him. But they have literally sought to deplatform him, delegitimize him, and to destroy him economically. If the Swiss government doesn't do something about this, then let me put it this way. I've just published a book, and it's been put out in Spanish and German and some other European languages as well. And I was supposed to go to Spain and Germany and maybe some other places in March. And when Jacques Beau when this happened, I received sound legal advice not to go anywhere near Europe right now. I definitely will never go to the United Kingdom. I would be arrested on the spot. They would treat me more harshly than they treated George Galloway. And now the notion of me traveling to Europe, I used to go to a Swiss conference every year. Wonderful group of people. I'm not going to Switzerland now, not because they're doing nothing about Jacques Beau. And if they're going to treat one of their own, a national resource, a national hero like this, what would they do to an American who has been singled out by the European Union, by the Ukraine? The Ukrainians have singled me out for death. I got a bomb threat in the mail the other day. The Post Service isn't taking it seriously, but I do. This is the world we live in right now. And Americans need to understand that this freedom of speech issue. A lot of people are like, why does J.D. Vance, stick his nose in Europe's business? Because freedom of speech is absolute and universal. And when you start silencing people anywhere in the world, it resonates globally, especially when you silence a voice of reason, an intelligent voice, a fact-based voice, a voice that has been proven factually correct across the board. It means you're silencing the truth. And when you silence the truth, what's that say about the quality of the life and existence that we collectively lead?
Last question. I know you've written extensively about this, but we have just a few minutes left. What is the significance of the Oreshnik?
The Oreshnik is game, set, match. First of all, it's real. A lot of people are saying, well, it's just a bluff. It was an experimental missile. No, the Oreshnik now, there is a brigade, I believe. They used to deploy them in regiments. I think now that's a brigade, but it's still 3 battalions, 3 launchers, 9 missiles, operational. When I say operational, it just doesn't mean that you've married the missile up with the launcher. That actually took place back in August. When the first missile rolled off of the Votkins production facility and then was sent to Kapustin Yar, where it married up with the launcher that had been purpose-built back in March of this year. And they put the missile on, and then they trained the troops on, the technical parameters of the missile, how it operates, how it performs. And then they went through their combat drills. And so they did all of this, and now the unit has been brought up, and it's in Belarus in a facility that has been repurposed. It's a former SS-20 facility back in the INF days that was decommissioned. They brought it back. When I look at the photographs, they've put back the nuclear weapons technical handling area. So this is a brigade that has conventional and nuclear capacity. I believe it's probably a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning they got 3 nuclear armed Oreshniks and 6 conventionally armed Oreshniks, and the Russians are going to be doing similar things. The West has nothing that can come close to the capabilities of this system, and this system allows Russia the ability to do strategic escalation in a non-nuclear fashion, meaning that they can fire these missiles, they can reach out and touch anywhere they want in Europe in response to provocations from the West without automatically triggering a nuclear. So it gives Russia even more flexibility. Europe's got nothing that can match this. The missiles in serial production. That means that from August until December, they produced a brigade's worth of material. Okay, so that's August, September, October, November, December. They're going to have 2 or 3 brigades coming out a year, and they will do this for as long as it takes. And next thing you know, there's going to be 300 of these missiles. And there's nothing. We have the Dark Eagle. And as I already said about China, the Dark Eagle, if it's deployed to Germany, can do nothing. It's got this tiny little warhead that they don't even know if it works. They've spent so much time trying to get the Dark Eagle to actually leave the launcher and then fly like it's supposed to. It can go Mach 4 or Mach 5. The Oreshnik comes in at Mach 10 or 11, just to understand that. But in order to do this, they never focused on actually what the kinetic strike capacity is, what damage is done. They don't know if the warhead of the Dark Eagle can accomplish the military tasks that it's been assigned. That's our best. And they're going up against the Russians who have the Oreshnik. And now, the Russians are talking about Oreshnik 2.0. That's the next one. And they're talking about other systems, Oreshnik-like. They're going to be flooding the field with these new intermediate range missiles that give them conventional overmatch in Europe. When Putin says that he will destroy Europe, it's not necessarily through nuclear weapons. Russia's developing the capability to destroy Europe conventionally.
Wow. Scotty, we have to go. Christmas is upon us. I know you're doing some traveling, and we'll be off unless there's major developments that require we come on for 10 days. Leading up to resuming on January 5th, which is 2 weeks from today. Maverick is happy that we'll be off. This year, Judging Freedom for the second year in a row exceeded 100 million views. You are the most popular guest on the program, and I can't, of course, thank you enough. We have become very good friends. We've traveled together. We've collaborated on projects. You're a great human being. And I value deeply our professional relationship and our personal friendship, and I thank you for it.
Well, I thank you very much. I share the same sentiment, and as good as this year was, and this is a pretty exciting year, I think next year is going to be even better. And hopefully it's better in terms of heading towards better outcomes. But I look forward to working with you in the year to come.
Thank you, Scott. All the best to you. Safe travels. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. A busy day tomorrow. I'm not even going to give you the times, but it's virtually every hour with the exception of 9 a.m. and noon. Ambassador Chaz Freeman, Pepe Escobar, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Aaron Mate, Matt Ho, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, Max Blumenthal. We'll see you tomorrow. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom. Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, November 21st, 2024. Scott Ritter joins us now on two breaking news subjects. Scott, I want to spend a fair amount of time with you on whatever it is the Russians fired today. But before we do, the other breaking news is the indictment of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and the issuing by the International Criminal Court of arrest warrants for both. What is the significance, the geopolitical significance, if any, of these momentous steps?
Well, from a political standpoint, obviously, it's a sharp blow against Netanyahu, Gallant, and Israel, because the implication behind the indictments, the issuing of these warrants for arrest, is that they have committed criminal acts, acts of genocide. It furthers the case that many around the world, myself included, are making, that Israel is a genocidal state and that the leadership of Israel is accountable for these actions. So it's damaging in that way. But anybody who thinks that Netanyahu will ever have a pair of ICC handcuffs placed on him, it will never happen. First of all, the United States has made it clear that it will never happen. And the United States is on record telling the ICC, if you ever arrest an American service member, if you ever try to bring charges, we passed a law that said we can come in and kill you.
When they would treat Netanyahu as if he were an American. I mean, let me back up. Suppose his plane needs fuel and he lands in Iceland and they come out to arrest him on the tarmac. What happens?
The United States puts Iceland on notice that that's an act of war. We will treat it as an act of war. We've said that the ICC has no jurisdiction, and we've said that we will protect him. We treat Israel as an extension of the United States. Again, for anybody out there thinking that I'm happy about this, I'm not. I would love to see ICC handcuffs on this man. I would love to see him in The Hague. I'd love to see him rot in jail. But the United States has made it clear that the ICC has no jurisdiction over Israel. And they've also linked the prosecution of Israelis by the ICC to the same framework of what would happen if they tried to prosecute Americans.
Isn't this a just prosecution? I mean, I read it's actually a ruling by a panel of 3 judges. So the indictment process is different. In America, the prosecutors draft the indictment and they persuade a grand jury to ratify it. Sometimes the grand jury insists on changes which they can make. In the ICC, a panel of 3 judges receive the application for the indictment. They write the indictment, the 3 judges do, and they write an opinion justifying it. The opinion is devastating towards Netanyahu. It is basically what you and others on this show have been telling us for the past, year and a half, going back to October 7th. The slaughter of innocents, the deprivation of food, water, shelter, and medicine to innocents. These are war crimes, and these indictments surely are deserved by any measure of justice other than that as seen through the Zionist eyes.
100%. There's no dispute. I mean, these are damning indictments. They ring with authority. They are fact-based. They cannot be challenged factually. But we're not dealing with facts. We're dealing with perceptions. And perception creates its own reality, especially when that perception is backed by the weight of the United States government. And in this case, we reject it. Keep in mind that the ICC once considered prosecuting American special forces in Afghanistan for murdering Afghan civilians, and they were put on notice that if you ever do that, we will arrest you, we will arrest your families, we will make your life a living hell. And they quickly dropped it. And as like I said, the Congress has passed a law that basically allows the United States to use military force to recover any American personnel that have been who happen to have been arrested by the ICC. And this
what is the ICC? Who owns it, runs it, staffs it, stocks it, makes it legitimate? Is it the UN?
No, the ICC is not the International Court of Justice. The ICJ is a body mandated by the United Nations. It is the highest body in the land for dealing with legal precedent regarding international law. The ICC is a creation of I think they call it the Rome Treaty, but it's
the Treaty of Rome, which the United States and Israel did not sign.
We didn't sign. We're not signatories, so we say it doesn't apply to us. And this was designed to hold to account African, warlords, dictators, to hold to account, bad Serbs, bad Croats, to hold to account the lessers. It was never meant to hold to account the principles. The ICC was never meant to hold to account the United States or any NATO nation, nor will it ever hold them to account. It just isn't going to happen, which is why the concept of holding Israel to account is absurd on the face, not because of the lack of legitimacy for the cause, but this court wasn't built. It wasn't intended, wasn't structured to go after the Israels of the world, even though Israel deserves it.
Chris, do we have the clip that we ran for Professor Sachs, which is Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments back in April when the word had circulated that he might be indicted? Listen to this. This will aggravate you a little bit, but listen to this, Scott.
You have to hear this to believe this. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is contemplating issuing arrest warrants against senior Israeli government and military officials as war criminals. This would be an outrage of historic proportions. International bodies like the ICC arose in the wake of the Holocaust committed against the Jewish people. They were set up to prevent such horrors, to prevent future genocides. Yet now, the International Court is trying to put Israel in the dock. It's trying to put us in the dock as we defend ourselves against genocidal terrorists and regimes, Iran of course, that openly works to destroy the one and only Jewish state. branding Israel's leaders and soldiers as war criminals, will pour jet fuel on the fires of anti-Semitism, those fires that are already raging on the campuses of America and across capitals around the world.
Does that surprise you, that self-righteous victimization response?
No, I mean, just imagine if the Allies had tried to, pull a Nuremberg without actually defeating Nazi Germany. And imagine Hitler and Goebbels and Goering coming up, and they would make similar statements. The German people this, the German people that, da 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 da. Benjamin Netanyahu is a Nazi. He's a Zionist. The same thing. I mean, he behaves as a Nazi. What he's doing to the Palestinians is just as bad as what the Germans did to the Jews. I mean, the Palestinians may not be going up a chimney. No, they're being squashed to death with collapsed buildings that are blown up around them. I mean, death is death, and this is targeted killing by a group that believes themselves to be supreme, and their victims to be human animals. The Nazis viewed the Jews that way, and the Zionists view the Palestinians that way. So it doesn't surprise me that Netanyahu did this. It's what you would expect from a genocidal maniac.
Let's transition over to Russia and Ukraine. What did Russia fire at Ukraine today, and what is the significance of the Russian use of this weapon?
Well, first of all, we don't know what Russia fired. When Vladimir Putin gave his address, I think it took everybody but the most read-in intelligence officials by surprise. He announced a new missile, the Oreshnik. It means hazel. Interesting name, because hazel is the wood that the Russians used to use to carve the cudgel that they used to beat non-compliant workers into submission. So the implication is that this is a cudgel that Russia will be using to beat the West into submission. It's as described by Vladimir Putin, it's a medium-range missile, and that's an important term. Generally speaking, medium-range missiles have a range between 1,000 and 3,000 kilometers. Which means it's not an intercontinental ballistic missile. The Ukrainians had identified it as an intercontinental ballistic missile, in particular identified it as what's known as an RS-26 Rubieж or Frontier missile system. What's interesting in saying that is that the United States notified Ukraine that Russia was preparing to launch a missile and shared satellite imagery with the Ukrainians. Apparently, they didn't share the highly sensitive other intelligence that the United States had, which led them to know that this wasn't an RS-26. This was an experimental missile by Russia. But the Ukrainians looked at the image and they called it an RS-26, which means that whatever was on the stand at the Kapustin Yar missile test facility looks like an RS-26. That means it's a road mobile system with 6 axles. It uses a launch canister, and it has certain dimensions. So what I believe this is a modification of the RS-26, maybe only using the RS-26 as a 2-stage missile. This might only be a 1-stage, using the first stage with a maneuvering warhead bus. This warhead bus, at least as fired against the Dnipro factory, had 6 independently targeted missiles. But what's interesting about this is each of these independently targeted warheads, each of these warheads had at least 6 large submunitions. So basically, 6 warheads came in, released 6 submunitions each, and there were 36 saturation impacts on the Dnipro factory. Now, the factory that was struck is an old Soviet-era factory. The Yuzhmash facility used to produce intercontinental ballistic missiles for the Soviet Union. Now it's being used, it was being used by the United States and Great Britain and Ukraine to build for the Ukrainians short-range and intermediate-range missiles that would be able to launch long-range strikes inside Russia. So Russia just took that factory out. It no longer functions. The missile that they used is nuclear capable, and this is important. It is a nuclear capable system that used a conventional warhead, but could be used for nuclear purposes. And Putin basically said that this missile now can cover all of Europe and that in the future he will mirror every action by Ukraine in the West, that any escalation will immediately be responded to, So anybody who thought that Russia was bluffing, that you could call Russia's bluff, has now been put on notice that Russia is not bluffing. This is a major escalation. This is bringing in a new category of weapons. It is a qualitative advance, and it has put us dangerously down the path towards nuclear conflict, because all it takes is one or two more miscalculations. I think Putin, by striking the Dnipro factory, has created a buffer of escalatory possibility, meaning that, let's say Ukraine insanely decides to fire off more Storm Shadow missiles against Russia. Putin said that the missile will be used, and he said, but next, if we use it against built up areas, we'll give warning to the civilians to evacuate. The implication here is that the next time Russia uses this missile, it'll strike Kiev, Bankova Street, the seat of government, and seek to destroy Ukraine's ability to govern itself. And then after that, depending on what escalation takes place, remember, he said he will hold to account the nations responsible. And he blamed the United States and Great Britain directly. So we may see him extend this, for instance, taking out the American missile facility that just the ballistic missile defense facility that just opened up in Poland, or take out the other one in Romania to strike British targets in the region. So, and once that does, then we create the possibility of NATO triggering Article 5. Now we're a conflict between Russia and NATO, and we all die. That's how dangerous this is. We are very, very close to reaching the point of no return when it comes to nuclear war. And keep in mind that just within the last 24 hours, Rear Admiral Buchanan of the United States Strategic Command came out and issued a statement in response to the news that Vladimir Putin had signed off on a new nuclear doctrine. And he said that the United States prepared to engage in a nuclear exchange with Russia, that we believe we can win, and that we won't use all our nuclear force because we're going to win and still maintain nuclear deterrence against the rest of the world. Let me say that one more time so the audience understands what I just said. The United States is prepared to engage in a nuclear exchange with Russia that we think we can win. I would have liked to ask him which cities he's willing to give away in this exchange, and what population numbers is he talking about? Is he talking about only 6 million dead, or are we going to lose?
Well, this admiral is a lunatic. Could the White House possibly, well, the White House is filled with lunacy as well, have authorized something as provocative and absurd as this?
Well, this is a fair question. I mean, somebody had to authorize him to make this statement, but it's a grossly irresponsible statement to make at this time. And let me tell you why. Because if I'm a Russian listening to that, that tells me that the Americans believe they can fight a limited nuclear war and win it. That means that they're preparing to win it. When you say that you're going to retain sufficient stockpiles to continue deterrence posture, that means that you're probably thinking about a preemptive strike against the Russians to take out Russia's capabilities, because that's the only way an exchange works, that you can walk away from. You can't ride out a Russian attack. Russia has enough capability to just flatten every aspect of the United States. But if we
what is this admiral's name again, Scott?
Buchanan. Rear Admiral Buchanan. If you Google it,
is there any question in your mind, but that the use of the Oreshnik was a direct response to American use of ATACMS and British use of Storm Shadows reaching into Russia?
There's no doubt in my mind, and Putin said as such. I also communicated with some Russians. Apparently, the Storm Shadow attack struck a Russian command and control facility, and in the Kursk region, and there were Russian casualties.
Oh boy!
Russia is preparing murder charges against the British forces involved in Storm Shadow, because there's no legality for their action. Great Britain is not in a state of war with Russia, and yet Great Britain has facilitated the deaths of Russians using British weapons. So the Russians are in the process of identifying these people, and they will charge them with murder. But they didn't destroy the command and control facility. It's still functioning. It's still doing its job. But the Ukrainians used the Storm Shadow, which is targeted by the United States and Great Britain, to strike a Russian command and control facility in Kursk, killing Russian soldiers. And this is undoubtedly what triggered Putin's response.
What was gained from the Western American, UK, NATO perspective by the use of the ATACMS and the Storm Shadow?
We have to look at the timing of this, Judge. This is very, because remember, the Biden administration had already rejected this scenario previously back in September.
Right. They did it in a way that publicly humiliated the British Prime Minister.
100%. And the reason why was stated clearly by Lloyd Austin, that these weapons will not change the outcome. They don't have the ability to change the outcome of what's happening on the battlefield, that the only way this war ends is with the Ukrainians and the Russians sitting down and negotiating an end. That was and the other thing is, if you use these weapons, you lead us down, the United States down a path that takes us dangerously close to nuclear war. So wisely, the Biden administration said, we don't want to do this. We don't want to engage in that. Now, what changed? They're doing it now. Why? November 5th. There's the answer. And Judge, this is this interesting constitutional problem that we have here, because we have a presidential campaign where the winning candidate ran on a platform that clearly articulated that they wanted to get out of Ukraine, that they didn't want a nuclear confrontation with Russia, and that they were looking to limit the ability of NATO to impose foreign policy prerogatives on the United States. What we now have is a presidential administration, a lame duck administration, that's acting in direct opposite to the stated will of the people by their vote. And they're doing this not because there's a threat that they have to respond to. These are decisions of choice being made to directly contradict earlier policy decisions that were made back in September. Then the question is, who is doing this? Is the president of the United States actually making this? There's a case that can be made that this man is of such diminished cognitive capacity that he's incapable of making the complicated decisions, that this is actually a coup d'etat being carried out by Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and here's the problem: unelected deep state.
Right.
The class of unelected permanent.
We talked about this the other day, Scott. Might these people, whoever they are, Lloyd Austin, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, others unknown and unnamed, be engaged in this horrific political tit for tat? You and your crazy Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, might be their thinking, negotiated this terrible deal with the Taliban, not with the government of Afghanistan, and it exploded on our watch. Well, guess what? We're going to push Ukraine into exploding on your watch. Might they have done something as thoughtless, heedless, immoral, unlawful, unconstitutional, and killing of innocents as that?
Yes, they have a name for what they're doing right now. It's called Trump proofing. They are Trump proofing NATO. They are Trump proofing Ukraine, and they are Trump proofing the deep state. They are making this problem so hard to resolve that Donald Trump thinks he wants to do one thing when he comes in office, but he'll be compelled to do something different because his hands will be tied. It's also predicated on the notion that Russia is bluffing, that because there are follow-on steps, and this is supposed to just be the use of Storm Shadow and attacks is just phase one of a series of actions that we know. This is, look at Zelensky's victory plan. It was scoffed at prior to November 5th. Now it's become the official policy. And the first part of the victory plan was give him long-range missiles to strike Russian command and control. The second part, to extend NATO air defense coverage and to shoot down Russian missiles flying over Ukraine. The third part, to extend NATO air power in. Now you created a de facto no-fly zone over Ukraine, and then you bring in NATO ground troops. And on January 20th, when Donald Trump rolls into the office, NATO and Ukraine are one and the same. Ukraine is now a de facto member of NATO, and Donald Trump has to deal with that reality. This is what they're trying to accomplish, but it's all predicated on the understanding that Russia is bluffing, that every time you seek to escalate, Russia will back down. That's the importance of what Vladimir Putin just did. He didn't respond using Kinzhal missiles that he's already used, Caliber missiles, Oryx missiles, anything of that nature. He responded with a brand new missile that is a game changer, because this missile not just can strike any part of Ukraine, but any part of Europe, and it can't be intercepted. And he made that point. I will hit anywhere in Europe I need to hit. I will mirror any action taken. The decisions have already been made. There won't be a discussion. You attack, we immediately hit back with this missile or other new missiles that you don't know anything about. That's what's interesting.
Do the Russians have ICBMs that could reach the mainland of the United States?
Do they have ICBMs? Judge, they have more ICBMs than you can shake a stick at, including one called the Sarmat. We call it the Satan. This one is a giant missile. It carries 18 to 20 independently targeted warheads, each one about between 200 to 500 kilotons. Remember, the bomb that took out Hiroshima was 12 kilotons. The one that took out Nagasaki was 20. We're talking about hitting American cities with 200 to 500 kilotons each, 18 of them in one missile, and they've got regiments of these. The Russians have more missiles than you can shake a stick at. They're all modern missiles, all incorporate hypersonic technology. None of them can be shot down, and it's the death sentence to the United States. I don't know what these people are thinking.
Do these people, Lloyd Austin, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, whoever the unnamed ones were, we're going to take Biden out of it because of his mental degradation. Do they understand what you're saying? Do they understand the gravity of what they have triggered?
They believe that Putin is bluffing. They believe that Putin, this whole nuclear doctrine that they signed off on, you hear it over and over again from Keir Starmer, British intelligence, Americans. It's just posturing by the Russians. They don't have the ability to back it up. They don't want to back it up. Putin's weak. Putin's this. Putin's that. And Putin just came out and said, "That's our doctrine. We'll use it. And, oh, here's our missile. It's nuclear capable in case we want to implement our doctrine. If you want to push it, the decisions have already been made." That's the scary part. Anybody who thinks that Putin's going to be running around frantically making phone calls to deal with whatever escalation is wrong. The decisions have been made. The orders have been given. It's automatic. It's not up to Russia to do anything different. Russia will be mirroring, this is Putin's words, mirroring the actions of the United States, NATO, and Ukraine. And whatever we do, there will be an immediate mirrored reaction that could bring down the world.
Who else is in cahoots with the U.S. and the British on this?
The French, to some extent. Rutte, the new Secretary General of NATO, is very much in cahoots. You saw the British Parliament stand up and give a standing ovation when they voted to give their support for releasing these long-range weapons. All the Baltic states, Poland, I think only a handful, Italy and Germany have come out against this, but almost everybody else has said, yes, this is what we want. We want these long-range systems done because they think Putin's bluffing. I'd like to see if they'd give a standing ovation today. And I want to remind them that, especially the European Parliament, you might be one of the targets that's going to get hit when they start reaching out and touching Europe.
Scott Ritter, this is terrifying stuff, but we need your courageous and candid analysis, and I'm deeply grateful for it.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yes, of course.
I am in the process of preparing, working with people to organize a Just Say No to Nuclear War rally in Washington, D.C. on December 7th and 8th. I've reached out to the Trump transition team to try and get them involved. I'd love to, at least have you involved if you want to get involved, but at least get your audience involved. We need to put as many people as possible in the streets of Washington, D.C. to shout out to Congress and shout out to the White House that no to nuclear war. No, I don't care what your political affiliation is. As long as you say, I don't want nuclear war, you need to be there, because we have an administration right now that's taking us down that path dangerously. So
the answer is yes, yes, 1,000 times yes.
Thank you. And let's make it, we're going to make it happen, because it has to happen.
Yes.
It's not something I want to be doing in December. It's the holiday season. I want to be home preparing my house for the holidays. But damn it, This administration's taken us to war, a nuclear war, something that everybody thought was unimaginable. It's happening right now in front of our very eyes.
Thank you, Scott Ritter. All the best, my dear friend.
Thank you.
You're welcome.